Hannah Carter pressed her husband's rifle into the banker's chest and told him she'd sooner be buried in her own dead field than be marched off it. Behind her, the creek lay cracked and gray. The geese were gone, and half the valley was already loading wagons to leave Wyoming for good. But that same morning, chasing those birds into a black crack beneath the old cliff, Hannah had found something in the dark that would either save every family in this valley or get them all killed before the first snow. If your heart is already with Hannah, do one thing for me before we go on. Tap subscribe and follow this story all the way to its end, and leave a comment telling me the city you're listening from, so I can see just how far Hannah's story has traveled. Then settle in with me, and let's begin. The last of the water was leaving the earth, and Hannah Carter was on her knees in the middle of it, digging with her bare hands. She dug where the creek used to run. Her fingers pushed through crust into mud, and the mud was warm and dry an inch down, and there was no water in it, none at all. And still she dug. Her nails split. A knuckle opened and bled into the dust, and she did not stop. She pushed both hands wrist deep and pressed her palms flat against the bottom of the hole, as if she could squeeze the creek back up out of the ground by wanting it hard enough. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, come on. You gave us water last spring. You gave it. Give it back." The ground gave her nothing. She heard the boots before she heard the voice. She knew his walk the way she knew her own heartbeat, and she did not turn around. "Hannah." "I'm fine, Ethan." "Your hands." "I said I'm fine." Ethan Carter crouched down beside his wife in the ruin of the creek bed and took both her hands out of the hole. He turned them palm up, blood and dirt. He did not say anything about it. He just held them, and his own hands were rough and steady, and after a moment Hannah stopped fighting him and let them be held. "There's water somewhere under here," she said. "There has to be. Springs don't just die." "Some do. Not ours." Her voice cracked. "Not ours, Ethan. We put everything into this place. Everything I had, everything you had. If this ground dies, what did we do it for?" He didn't answer that. He was a quiet man, and he'd learned that some questions weren't meant to be answered so much as sat with. He wiped the dirt off her knuckles with the tail of his shirt, gentle as a man handling a bird, and she watched him do it, and something in her chest pulled tight. "Don't be kind to me right now," she said. "I'll fall apart if you're kind." "Then fall apart. I'll be here when you're done." She laughed, and the laugh turned into something else, and she pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth to hold it in. She would not cry in a dead creek. She had promised herself that much when they came out here. She could lose the crops. She could lose the water. She would not lose herself. 20 geese this morning," she said when she had her voice again. "I counted 20 at dawn. I counted them at noon, and there were 11. Ethan frowned. "Coyotes. No blood, no feathers scattered, no noise. Coyotes don't take 9 grown geese in daylight without a sound, and you know it." She pulled her hands free of his and she stood the way she always did, planting herself, taking her weight unashamed of it, though the world had taught her plenty of shame. "Something's happening to this valley. The water, the geese, all of it. And nobody in Cold Springs wants to say the word out loud." "What word?" "Dying." She looked at him. "This valley is dying, Ethan. And Silas Thorne is standing at the edge of it with his hand out, waiting to catch whatever falls." The name settled over both of them like a shadow. Ethan got to his feet slow and looked off toward the north where the land rose in gray steps toward the old cliff. He didn't like to speak ill of any man without cause. But there were some men that cause followed around like flies followed a wound. "We got the note due in 30 days, he said. "That's the fact of it. Talking about Thorne's hand don't change the note. It changes what I'll let him take." She wiped her hands on her apron, leaving 2 long streaks of red-brown across the cloth. "Come on. Help me find the rest of those birds before dark. Those geese are the last thing on this place worth anything, and I raised every one of them from an egg. I'm not letting them vanish too." They walked the fence line together as the afternoon burned down. 9 geese gone and no sign of them. Not a track that led anywhere. Not a scattered feather. Hannah kept her eyes on the ground, and Ethan kept his on the ridge. And neither of them said much, because there wasn't much to say that didn't circle back to money and water and the 30 days. Their homestead sat alone at the head of the valley farthest from town, closest to the mountains. That had been the whole appeal when they'd bought it. Cheap land, land nobody else wanted, because it was too far from the rail and too close to the wild. Ethan had walked the whole parcel the first day and come back and told Hannah it was the prettiest ground he'd ever seen, and he'd be proud to be buried in it. She had teased him for talking about dying on the day they signed for a life. Now the teasing had a bruise on it. "You remember what old Tom Pryor said?" Hannah asked, "when we bought up here. Tom Pryor says a lot of things. He said, the mountain gives and the mountain takes, and a smart family learns which it's doing before they build." She stopped walking. "I used to think that was old man talk. And now I think Tom Pryor knew this valley better than the man who sold it to us." They found nothing before dark, and they went home hungry, and Hannah cooked what little there was, and they ate it without complaint, because complaint didn't fill a plate. She'd been a big woman all her life, and folks who didn't know better assumed a big woman never went without, and they were wrong, and she'd stopped explaining it to them years ago. She ate her half of a thin supper and gave Ethan the larger portion because he worked the harder hours, and when he tried to push it back, she put her hand flat on the table and told him to eat what his wife gave him, and he ate it, and under the table his boot found hers and stayed there. They sat a while after the plates were clean, the lamp turned low to save the oil, and neither one in a hurry to move. "You remember the church social?" Hannah said out of nowhere. Ethan looked up. "Which one?" "You know which one. Back in Missouri, the one where I stood by the wall the whole night." She turned her cup slowly in her two hands. "Where every girl got asked to dance but me. And the Pruitt boy came over, and I thought finally, and he leaned in and asked me real polite whether the pie table was holding my weight all right." She said it flat, the way a person says a thing they've carried so long the sharp edges have gone smooth from handling. The whole room laughed, Ethan, every soul in it. I stood there in my good dress that my mama sewed, and I smiled because if you don't smile, they say you can't take a joke, and I smiled at all of them laughing at me. "I remember," Ethan said quietly. "I was there." "I know you were." She looked at him. "Do you remember what you did?" He didn't answer. He was not a man who liked to be praised for common decency. "You crossed that whole floor," Hannah said, "in front of everybody, and you took off your hat, and you held out your hand, and you asked me to dance. And I said, 'Don't you dare pity me, Ethan Carter.' And you said—" Her voice caught, and she pushed through it. "You said, 'Ma'am, I ain't got the first thing to pity you for. I got a thing to ask you, and I'm asking it slow, because I'm scared you'll say no.'" She wiped her eye with the heel of her hand quick, like she was annoyed at it. "First time in my life, a man was scared, I'd say no. Not scared, I'd say yes, and stick him with me. Scared, I'd say no." "Wasn't scared," Ethan said. "Was terrified." She laughed wet and short. "I danced with you because you were kind," she said. "I married you because you weren't. Kind, I mean, not to me. You never once treated me like a thing that needed rescuing. You treated me like a woman worth the standing up for. There's a difference, and no one in that room but you ever knew it." She reached across the table and put her scarred hand over his. "Half this valley looks at me and sees the pie table. You looked at me and saw a partner. And I'll tell you something, Ethan Carter. When that man Thorne stood in the street today and talked about me being out on the road, a woman my size with nothing for 1 second, I was that girl by the wall again, smiling while they laughed." "Hannah, let me finish." She tightened her hand on his. "For 1 second. And then I remembered I've got you, and I've got this ground, and I am not by the wall anymore, and I am done. I am so done letting small men decide what I'm worth by the size of me." Her jaw set in the low lamplight. "He thinks I'll be easy because I've been made to feel small my whole life. He's got it exactly backwards. A person who's been made to feel small learns to plant her feet, Ethan. She learns to take her weight and not apologize for it, and she is very, very hard to move. Ethan turned his hand over under hers and laced their fingers together. "I'd have crossed 100 floors," he said. "I'd cross 'em now." "I know you would." She squeezed once and let go and stood to clear the cups. "That's why I mean to see us keep this place. Not for the land. Land's just dirt. For the two people who built something on it that nobody in that church social ever thought either of us deserved." She set the cups in the basin. "Come to bed. Tomorrow's going to ask a lot of us." Morning came dry. Morning always came dry now. Hannah was up before the sun, and she went out to the pen to count geese, and there were 6. 6. She stood at the fence with the count going wrong in her mouth, and felt the fear come up her spine cold and certain. 5 gone in the night. No fox could climb that fence. No man could take 5 geese quiet enough that the dog didn't so much as lift his head, and there was the dog-tail thumping fed and calm and undisturbed. Ethan. He came out pulling his suspenders up over his shoulders, and he counted the birds himself because he was that kind of man, and he came up 6 the same as her. "They're not being taken," Hannah said slowly. "They're leaving. On their own. Something's calling them somewhere, and they're walking to it. Geese don't just walk off in the night." "Then you count them and tell me a better answer." He couldn't, and she knew he couldn't, and they stood there in the gray light with the fear between them like a third person, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was that in a valley where the water dies and the birds vanish and the note comes due. In 30 days, a family had better find an answer to something soon, or they would not be a family with a valley at all. That was the morning they had to go to town. The trip to Cold Springs took 2 hours by wagon, and Hannah spent most of it with her back straight and her chin level because she knew what waited in town, and she would not go into it looking beaten. Cold Springs was a hard town and a hard year. The drought had put a look on everyone's face, a pinched, watchful, hungry look, and hunger made people mean. Hannah had learned that early, too. The wagon came down the main street, and she saw the eyes turn, and she felt them, and she kept her chin level. They tied up outside the mercantile. Ethan came around to help her down, and she took his hand, and behind them, from the shade of the porch, a voice came slow and lazy and cruel. "Careful there, cowboy. She comes down off that wagon wrong, she'll bring the whole street down with her." Laughter. 2-3 men on the mercantile porch, and Hannah felt her face go hot, and she kept her chin level. Ethan turned around. He did it slow. That was the thing about Ethan Carter that the men on the porch didn't understand until it was too late. He was not a big man, and he was not a loud man, and he did nothing fast, and that slowness was not weakness. It was a man taking careful aim. "Which one of you said that?" Ethan said. Not loud, not a question quite. The porch went quiet. "Say it again," Ethan said. "Say it to me and not to her back. Go on. I'll wait." Nobody said it again. Ethan tipped his hat back an inch, the way a man does when he's deciding whether the day is going to require his hands. "That's my wife," he said. "She's got more decency in her little finger than the 3 of you got in your whole hides. Next man makes a sound about her, I'll know his name, and I'll know his face, and I'll come find both. We clear?" They were clear. Hannah put her hand on his arm. "Ethan, let it go." "I have let it go," he said for the last time. But he turned back to her, and the hard went out of his face, and he offered her his arm like she was a lady stepping into a ballroom, instead of a rancher's wife stepping into a dusty street. And she took it because she loved him more in that moment than she had words for. And they walked into the mercantile together with the whole town watching. Inside, Amos Kettleman weighed out their flour and their beans and did not quite meet their eyes. He was not a cruel man, Amos. He was just a scared one, and scared men couldn't afford to be seen being kind to a family that might not make the winter. "Heard the Doyles are pulling out," he said quietly, wrapping the beans. "Sold their quarter section to the bank. Whole family gone by Sunday." "The Doyles have been here 12 years, Hannah said. "Yes'm, and they sold for near nothing because near nothing was what was offered, and near nothing beats losing it all to the note." Amos glanced toward the window. "You didn't hear it from me, but you ought to know how the wind's blowing. It's blowing toward the bank, Mrs. Carter. It's blowing every family in this valley straight towards Silas Thorne's front door, and he's got that door open real wide. Hannah set her hands on the counter. How many families? 6 sold already. 4 more this month the way it's going. Amos wrapped the flower. Man buys a whole valley one dead farm at a time, and it don't look like robbery because there's a paper for every piece of it. But you stand back far enough and look at the whole thing. He shook his head. You stand back far enough, and you see one man's about to own everything from the rail to the mountains, and every drop of water in between. Water, Hannah repeated. Amos went still. He'd said more than he meant to. I got customers, he said, and moved off down the counter and would not look at her again. Hannah found Ethan by the door. Where's the creek come from? She said. Our creek. Where's its head? North. Up past the Alderdice place, on into the high ground toward the cliff. He frowned at her. Why? Because Amos Kettleman just about told me something and then swallowed it. She took his arm. Because a creek doesn't die from the bottom up, Ethan. It dies from the top down. It dies where the water starts. They did not get to finish the thought because the bank door opened across the street and Silas Thorne came out onto the boardwalk, and the whole street seemed to lean away from him without moving an inch. He was a handsome man, Thorne, and that was the worst of it. A handsome, well-fed, smiling man in a good gray coat, and he crossed the street toward them with his hand already out. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter. He smiled at Hannah, and the smile never reached his eyes. You're both looking well. Considering. Considering what? Hannah said. Considering the times. Thorne clasped his hands behind his back. Hard times. Cruel times. I lie awake nights over it, you know. All these good families, all this suffering. It weighs on a man of conscience. Does it? Hannah said. It does. He turned to Ethan as men like Thorne always turn to the husband, as if the wife were furniture. Mr. Carter, I'll speak plain because I respect you. Your note comes due in 29 days, $240. Now I've watched your creek same as everyone's, and I know what a dry year does to a high place like yours. You won't make it. I say that not to wound you, but because it's the truth, and a man deserves the truth. He let that sit. So, here's my kindness. Sell to the bank now today, and I'll give you fair value for the improvements. You walk away with something in your pocket instead of nothing in your hand. You walk away with your dignity. Fair value, Ethan said. $60. Hannah laughed out loud. She couldn't help it. $60 for a house Ethan built with his own 2 hands and 40 acres and a barn and a well. The well's near dry, Mrs. Carter, as you well know. And whose doing is that? She said. The street went quiet. Thorne's smile held, but something moved behind his eyes, quick as a snake under a rock. I'm sure I don't take your meaning. I'm sure you do. Hannah stepped forward, and Ethan's hand came to the small of her back, not holding her away, holding her steady. You come out here in your gray coat and tell us the creek's dying like it's the weather doing it. But water comes from the high ground and runs down Mr. Thorne. And you've been buying up the high ground for 2 years. So I'll ask you what I asked Amos Kettleman. Where's the water going? Because it isn't reaching us, and it used to. For one held breath, the smile was gone, and Hannah saw the real man underneath it. And the real man was looking at her the way a man looks at a lock he means to break. Then the smile came back. You've a vivid imagination, Mrs. Carter, Thorne said softly. It's a charming quality in a woman. Less charming when it leads her to slander a man of business in the public street. He touched his hat. 29 days, $60. The offer stands until it doesn't. After that, the note takes its course, and no one will be able to say I didn't try to help. He looked at her one more time, and the look was cold all the way down. Do give it thought. A woman your size out on the road with winter coming with nothing. He shook his head, all false sorrow. It doesn't bear thinking about. He walked back to his bank. Hannah stood in the street with her heart slamming and her face on fire, and Ethan's hand stayed at her back, and it took everything she had not to pick up a rock. He did it, she said. He's taking the water. He's killing the whole valley on purpose, so he can buy it dead. You can't prove it." "No." She turned to her husband. "Not yet, but I know it now. I know it in my bones. And a man who'd starve a valley for a profit isn't going to stop at the Doyles or at us. He wants all of it, Ethan. Every farm, every family, every drop." She looked north toward the high ground, toward the cliff. "The water's up there, and so's whatever he doesn't want us to find." They drove home in a silence heavier than the one they came in on. A mile out of town, the road bent past a low sod house with a crooked chimney, and old Tom Pryor was sitting out front on a nail keg, the way he'd sat out front every day. Hannah had known him, whittling at nothing, watching the road. He raised a hand. Ethan slowed the wagon. "Sold yet?" Tom called. He had a way of getting to the bone of a thing. "Not yet," Ethan said. "Won't neither if you got sense, and I always took you for a man with more sense than money." Tom spat to the side and set down his knife. "Come here a minute, girl, you especially. You got a look on you I ain't seen since my wife found out the Lord was lying to her." Hannah climbed down and came to the fence. Tom Pryor was 90 if he was a day, and he'd been in this country before there was a Cold Springs, before there was a Wyoming to speak of, and he'd buried 3 wives and outlived every one of his enemies out of pure spite. "You said a thing to us when we bought our place," Hannah said. "You said the mountain gives and the mountain takes. What did you mean by it, Tom Plain? I need it plain today." The old man looked at her a long time, and his rheumy eyes were not so foolish as folks like to think. "My first winter up here," Tom said slowly, "was the winter of the deep snow. 60 years gone. Killed near everybody. And I'd have died too, a boy alone, but for an old Shoshone woman took pity on me." He picked the knife back up, turned it in his fingers. "She told me this country's got a warm heart. Told me there's places in these mountains the snow don't reach and the water don't freeze. Secret places, breathing places where the ground stays alive all through the killing months. Said her people knew 'em and kept 'em and never took more than they gave back. Said the mountain'll feed a humble soul and bury a greedy one, and the trick of living long up here is knowing which one you are." He looked up at Hannah. "I thought it was an old woman's story. Then I saw where the geese go in winter. Same place every year up the high ground, and they come out fat when everything else is starving. So I stopped thinking it was a story." Hannah's hands had gone tight on the fence rail. "You know where the geese go?" "I know they go up," Tom said. "I got too old to follow 'em 30 year back. Never told a living soul on account of the kind of men that'd do with a thing like that." His eyes sharpened on her. "Why, you seen where they go, girl." For one heartbeat, Hannah nearly told him everything. Then she thought of Thorne's face and the sheriff's hand on his gun in a widow's yard, and she understood in her bones the exact weight of what Tom Pryor had just handed her, and what it would cost if it slipped. "No," she said. "I just lost half my flock, and I'm grasping at old stories to explain it." Tom Pryor looked at her for a long, knowing moment, and something passed across his ancient face that might have been disappointment, and might have been approval, and might on a man that old have been both at once. "Good answer," he said quietly. "You keep answering just like that girl to everybody but that man of yours. The mountain feeds the humble and buries the greedy. You remember it, and you remember old Tom told you first." He picked his knife back up and went back to whittling at nothing done with them. "Go on home. And whatever you found or didn't find you, take care it don't change you into something the mountain'd sooner bury." Ethan clucked to the horse. They drove on, and Hannah sat very still beside her husband, with the old man's words settling into her like seed into turned ground. Halfway back they passed the Alderdice place, and the widow Maggie Alderdice was out at her gate, with her 3 children around her skirts, and she flagged the wagon down. Hannah had known Maggie 2 years, and loved her most of them. She was a small, fierce woman who'd buried a husband and kept a farm and raised 3 children on will alone, and she did not flag people down for nothing. "They came this morning," Maggie said, holding the gate. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "The Banks man, Vance the sheriff with him, said I'm 3 months behind. I'm not 3 months behind, Hannah. I'm 1, and I've got the receipts, and they wouldn't look at the receipts." Her jaw worked. "They changed the paper. They changed what I owe." And when I said so, the sheriff put his hand on his gun and told me a widow ought to be careful making accusations. Hannah was down off of the wagon before Ethan could set the brake. "Show me the receipts," she said. "What good will it?" "Show me Maggie." Maggie brought them out, and Hannah spread them on the top of the gatepost, and Ethan came and stood over her shoulder, and the three of them read them together in the failing light. And it was there, plain as sin. The bank's ledger said one thing, and the widow's stamped receipts said another, and the difference between them was 2 months' payment and a farm. "He's forging the notes," Ethan said quietly. It was the first time Hannah had ever heard her husband sound afraid. "Hannah, he's changing the numbers after the fact. That's not sharp dealing. That's a hanging crime. It's how he does it." Hannah's mind was racing now, cold and clear. This is how he takes them all. He doesn't need the water to kill every farm. He just needs the water to kill enough that folks are scared, and then he forges the rest into ruin, and everybody's too frightened and too far behind to fight a bank with a sheriff in its pocket. She looked up at Maggie. "Keep these. Hide them. Do not give the originals to anyone. Not the sheriff, not a judge, not God himself walking up your road. These papers are the only true thing standing between Thorne and everything you've got. And what do I do when Vance comes back?" Hannah didn't have an answer, and it was the not having of it that lit the fire in her that would not go out again. "You send for me," she said. "That's what you do. You send for me, and I'll stand in your yard, and he'll have to go through both of us." She got back in the wagon. Ethan clucked to the horse, and they'd gone maybe a mile when Hannah put her hand on his arm and said, "Stop." "Hannah, stop the wagon. Look." He stopped the wagon. And up on the ridge, gray against the graying sky, 6 white shapes were moving in a line toward the cliff. The geese. The last 6 geese walking single file, calm and certain and unhurried, straight toward the base of the old cliff where the land folded up into stone. Not flying, walking, as if they were going home. Hannah was down off the wagon and climbing before Ethan got the horse tied. "Hannah, it's near dark. Then bring the lantern." She went up the ridge with her skirts hiked and her breath tearing and her bad hands aching, and Ethan came behind her with the lantern and the rifle, and they climbed toward the cliff with the last light draining out of the sky, following 6 white birds into the dark. The geese reached the base of the cliff and did not stop. Hannah reached it a minute behind them, and she stood there heaving for breath, and there was no goose anywhere. "Where?" She turned in a circle. "Ethan, where'd they go?" "They were right here. 6 of them right here and now." "Hannah!" Ethan's voice was strange. He was down on one knee at the base of the rock, holding the lantern low, and the light was pouring into a crack in the cliff face she never would have seen in 100 years of walking past it. A black seam in the stone no wider than a person half hidden behind a fall of dry brush. "Hannah, there's a wind coming out of here." She knelt beside him. And she felt it too. Warm. The air coming out of that crack was warm, and it was moist, and in a valley that had been dying of dry for 3 months. Warm, wet air was the most impossible thing she had ever felt against her face. She put her hand into the dark, and the warmth wrapped around her fingers like water. "Ethan," she whispered. "There's water in there. Feel it. There's water." "There's a mountain in there, is what there is, and we don't know how deep that crack runs, or what's living in it." He held the lantern up and looked at her face, and he knew that look he'd married that look. "Hannah, no, not in the dark. We come back at first light with rope and—" "The geese went in," she said. "The geese knew. They've been going in for 3 days, Ethan. That's where they went. That's where the water is. That's what this whole valley's been dying for want of, and it's been sitting up here under this cliff the whole time." She turned to him, and her face was lit up from below by the lantern, and there was something in it he hadn't seen in months. Not fear, not grief. Something that had gone missing from her when the creek died, and here it was come back. "Silas Thorne is buying up this valley for the water, and there's water right here. Right here under our own land, under our own crack in our own cliff, and he doesn't know it exists. You don't know that either." "Then let's go find out." She took his hand. her split, scabbed, stubborn hand closing around his. "You said you'd be proud to be buried in this ground. Well, I'm not ready to be buried yet, and neither is this valley. And I think the answer's been waiting in the dark this whole time for somebody to be brave enough or foolish enough to crawl in after it." She squeezed. "Come with me. Or hold the lantern while I go alone. But I'm going, Ethan. I have to know." He looked at his wife. His whole life, folded up small and warm and stubborn, kneeling in the dark at the mouth of a mountain. "You go first," he said. "You get stuck. I can't get past you to pull you out. So I go first." He handed her the rifle. "And you hold this, and if anything down there ain't a goose, you shoot it, and you don't ask it any questions." She kissed him hard and fast on the mouth. "That's the man I married," she said. Ethan Carter got down on his belly in the dust at the foot of the cliff, and he pushed the lantern ahead of him into the crack, and he went into the dark after it. And Hannah came behind him, turning her shoulders sideways to fit the stone cold and close on both sides. The warm, wet wind rising up around them, and for a moment wedged in the black between the world she knew and whatever waited past it, she felt the panic try to take her. The walls too tight, the dark too deep. Then the crack opened up. It opened all at once, the stone falling away on both sides, and Ethan's lantern swung up and out into open space, and the light that had been pressed small against rock suddenly had nowhere to stop, went out and out and up, and Hannah crawled out of the crack behind her husband and got to her feet, and she looked, and she forgot how to breathe. They were standing at the edge of a world. The cavern went up and back farther than the lantern could reach a great warm belly of stone, and it was not dark the way a cave is dark. There was a glow to it, faint and green gold, coming off the walls themselves, off some kind of soft growth that clung to the rock and gave its own dim light. And below them, down a gentle slope of smooth stone, the whole floor of the place was moving. Water. Water everywhere. Not a trickle, not a seep. Pools of it wide and still and steaming faintly in the warmth, fed by a dozen small falls that came down the far wall, silver in the lantern light, and joined and pooled and ran on into the dark. Clear water. Warm water. More water than the whole dead valley outside had seen in a season, sitting here in the belly of the mountain, patient, untouched, alive, and green. Growing things everywhere the water reached. Ferns tall as a child. Broad, soft leaves Hannah had no name for. Pale reeds standing in the shallows. A whole hidden country of green kept warm and watered and living while the world outside turned to bone. And there, at the edge of the nearest pool, 6 white geese stood preening in the steam, entirely at home, entirely unbothered, looking up at Hannah and Ethan as if to say, "Well, what took you so long?" Hannah's legs went out from under her, and she sat down hard on the warm stone. "Ethan," she said. Her voice came out very small in all that space. "Ethan, do you see it?" "I see it." He was standing dead still with the lantern shaking just slightly in his hand. "I see it, and I don't believe it. It's real. It's real. It's warm. That steam, that's real water." She put both hands flat on the warm stone beneath her and felt the heat of it come up through her palms. The same warmth she'd been digging for in the dead creek here all along, right under everything. The mountain's warm. The whole mountain's warm from underneath. That's why the water don't freeze. That's why things grow. That's why the geese come. They knew Ethan. The geese knew there was living water up here the whole time. Ethan crouched slowly beside her. He set the lantern down on the stone, and for a long moment, the two of them just knelt there at the edge of that impossible warm green world. 2 half-ruined people from a dying valley, and neither one of them said anything at all, because there was too much to say, and no words big enough to start. Then, Hannah began very quietly to cry. Not the hard, held-back crying she'd refused herself in the creek bed. This was different. This came up soft and warm and unstoppable, and Ethan put his arm around her and pulled her in, and she cried into his shoulder in the green glow with the water running and the geese preening, and he held her. And after a while, he realized he was crying too silent, the tears just running down into his beard. And neither of them was ashamed of it because there was no one to see but the geese, and the geese didn't judge. "We're saved," Hannah whispered. Ethan, we're saved. The ranch, the note, $60. He can keep his $60. There's water. There's food. Look at all that green. There's water enough for 100 farms. Hannah. Ethan's voice was careful. Hannah, listen to me now. What? He took her face in both his hands gently and turned it up to his and made her look at him. If there's water enough here for 100 farms, he said slowly, then this is exactly what Silas Thorne has been killing this valley to get. You understand me? This is the thing. This right here. This is what he's been after the whole time, only he don't know it's here. He thinks it's off in the high ground he's been buying, but it's here on our land, under our cliff. He held her eyes. The minute one soul in Cold Springs learns this cave exists, Thorne will burn the whole world down to own it. And there's a sheriff wears his badge. And there's men take his money and forge widows out of their farms. Hannah, we just found the most valuable ground in the whole territory, and we are the two poorest, most alone people in it. Hannah stopped crying. She looked around the cavern again, but she looked at it differently now, and Ethan watched her look at it, and he watched the joy in her face fold slowly into something older and harder, and more like the woman who'd stared Silas Thorne down in the middle of the street. No, she said. No what? No, he doesn't get it. She got to her feet. She stood the way she always stood, planting herself, taking her weight, and in the green glow of that hidden world, she looked to Ethan like something out of a story, a thing that belonged here more than he did. Every family in this valley is being starved off their land by a man who'd let children go hungry to fill his pockets. And the thing that could save every one of them is sitting right here in the dark, where nobody but us can reach it. She turned to her husband. We are not going to let him have it, Ethan. And we are not going to keep it neither. Hannah. We're going to use it. Her jaw set. The right way, the careful way. We're going to figure out how this place lives and how much it can give without dying. And we're going to keep this valley alive, one family at a time, right under Silas Thorne's nose, and he'll never know why the farms he's trying to starve keep refusing to die. She held out her hand to him. You with me? Ethan looked at the water. He looked at the green. He looked at the 6 geese and the steaming pools and the soft light coming off the living walls of a mountain that had been keeping this secret since before there was a Cold Springs to keep it from. Then he looked at his wife, and there was no question in him at all, and there never had been, not from the first day. I've been with you, he said, taking her hand, since before you'd have me. They went down the slope together, careful on the smooth, warm stone. The lantern held low, and the deeper they went, the more the mountain gave up its secrets. At the edge of the first pool, the reeds grew thick, and Hannah crouched and put her hand into the warm mud among them, and her fingers found something smooth and round, and she drew it up into the light. An egg, a goose egg, whole and firm, cool at the heart and perfect. She dug her fingers back in and found another, and she sat back on her heels with 3 of them cradled in her apron and her mouth open. Ethan? Ethan, feel how firm. These aren't from this week. These are old. These been down in this mud a long, long while, and they haven't spoiled not a one of them. It's the cold under the warm. The mud stays just cool enough down deep. She turned an egg in her fingers, wondering. The geese been laying in here for years, and the mountain's been keeping them. There's got to be hundreds. There's got to be a winter's worth of food sitting in this mud. Ethan just laid up and waiting. Ethan wasn't listening. He'd gone still again the way he did, and he was holding the lantern up to the wall behind the reeds. Hannah, he said, come look at this. She came, and growing up the warm wet stone thick and pale, and reaching for the faint green light, was a whole hanging garden of plants, and Hannah knew some of them, and didn't know the rest, and the ones she knew stopped her cold. That's yarrow, she said softly, touching a feathered leaf. That's yarrow, Ethan. My mama used it for fever. And that's, Lord, that's a mint of some kind. And there's a broadleaf there. I've seen the Shoshone women gather for wounds. These are healing plants. Medicine. Growing wild and thick and green in the middle of winter's teeth. Her hand shook. The Doyle baby had the lung fever last spring. 2 children died in this valley last winter that the doctor couldn't reach through the snow. And there's medicine growing here the whole time, warm and safe, an hour's walk from every one of those beds. She sat down slow in the reeds with the eggs in her lap and the green light on her face, and Ethan sat down beside her, and for a while they didn't speak. "It's all here," Hannah said finally. "Everything. Water for the crops and the stock. Food to get through the snow. Medicine for the sick. A whole valley's worth of surviving kept alive in the dark under our own cliff, while out there they're loading wagons and selling their lives to a man in a gray coat for $60. She pressed her lips together hard. "It ain't fair, Ethan. It ain't fair that it was here the whole time and folks were dying for want of it." "World's not fair," Ethan said. "You knew that at a church social when you were 16. I did." She looked at him. "And I learned something at that social, too. I learned that one person crossing a floor can change what a whole room means." She set the eggs gently aside and took both his hands. "We can't dig a channel out to the valley. Thorn'd see it in a day and the game'd be up. We can't tell a soul because a secret's only a secret while 2 people hold it and no more. But we can carry it out, Ethan. Quiet. A basket of eggs to the alderdice place. A bundle of yarrow to a sick child. Skins of clean water to a family whose well's gone dry. And we tell them we've got a spring on the high ground that never fails, and we let them believe what they want to believe, and we keep this valley breathing one armful at a time." Her eyes were fierce and wet in the green glow. "He wants to starve them out slow. We'll feed them back to life slower, and by the time he understands why the farms won't die, it'll be too late for him and just in time for everybody else." Ethan looked at her a long moment. Then slow. The corner of his mouth turned up the closest thing to a smile she'd seen on him since the creek went dry. "You'd have made a fearsome outlaw, Hannah Carter," he said. "I'd have made a fearsome anything," she said, "if the world had ever let me. It never did. So I'll settle for this." She gathered the eggs back up into her apron, careful as a woman gathering years. "Come on. We take a few tonight, and we leave the nests be, and we learn this place like scripture before we take one thing more than it can spare. The mountain's been generous with us. We're going to be worthy of it if it kills me." The geese at the edge of the pool lifted their heads all at once, as if they'd heard something the 2 of them couldn't. And far back in the dark, deeper in the mountain than the lantern light could reach, something answered a low sound in the stone water moving over water, the sound of a thing that had been alive a very long time and had no intention of dying now. They came out of the mountain a little after moonrise, and the first trouble of their new life was already waiting on them at the foot of the ridge. Ethan saw it first. He put his hand flat against Hannah's arm and stopped her cold on the slope, and she followed his eyes down to the road below, where a rider sat his horse in the dark, unmoving, looking up toward the cliff. "Don't move," Ethan breathed. "Don't you move." "Who is it?" "Can't tell. But he's watching the high ground, Hannah, and there's only one reason a man watches the high ground at night in this valley." They stood pressed against the rock with the eggs heavy in Hannah's apron, and the warm, wet smell of the cave still clinging to their clothes, and the rider sat, and the horse shifted, and a long minute crawled past. Then the moon slid clear of a cloud, and Hannah saw the shape of the man, the square shoulders, the low-crowned hat, the tin star catching a thread of light. "It's Vance," she whispered. "It's the sheriff." Then we wait. For how long? For as long as it takes him to get bored and go home. You want him to see 2 people coming down off that cliff at midnight? You want him wondering why? Ethan's voice was iron quiet. We stay right here. We don't so much as breathe loud. So they waited. Hannah's legs burned. The eggs grew heavier. The cold came down off the peaks and found its way through her shawl, and still Vance sat his horse in the road, patient as a spider, and Hannah began to understand something that turned her stomach cold. "He's not lost, Ethan," she murmured. "He's not passing through. He's watching for something. Somebody sent him to watch this end of the valley. Thorn." "Thorn?" She swallowed. "He knows the water's up here somewhere. He's known it a long time. He just don't know exactly where, and now he's put his dog out to sniff." Vance stayed the better part of an hour. When he finally turned his horse and rode back toward town, Hannah's teeth were chattering, and her feet had gone numb, and she nearly wept with the relief of moving. They came down the ridge slow and careful, keeping to the shadow of the rocks, and they didn't speak again until the cabin door was shut behind them and the eggs were safe on the table. Then Hannah sat down hard in her chair and put her face in her hands. "This is going to be harder than I thought," she said. "You want to stop?" She looked up sharp. "Did I say I wanted to stop?" "No." Ethan almost smiled. "No, I don't reckon you did. I'm saying it's going to be harder." She wiped her face and stood and began to pace, which was what she did when her mind was working. "We can't go up there in the daylight because folks would see us on the ridge. We can't go up at night without a lantern, and a lantern on the cliff might as well be a church bell. And now, Thorne's got Vance haunting the road like a bad conscience." She stopped. "So, we go up before dawn, in the gray, when there's just enough light to climb by, and not enough for a man on the road to make us out. And we go up separate routes, never the same way twice, and we never ever either one of us goes near that cliff when there's a soul in sight of it." Ethan leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else since the moment I put my hand in that water." She turned to him. "Because I know what it's worth, Ethan. And I know what Thorne would do to get it. And I know that the only thing keeping us alive right now is that he doesn't know we know. That's it. That's the whole of our protection. One secret." Her jaw set. "So we guard that secret like it's the last child on earth. Because if it gets out, we're not just ruined. We're dead. And so's Maggie, and so's everybody we mean to help. You understand me. I understand you." He crossed the room and put his hands on her shoulders. "But I'll tell you what I understand better. I understand you already got a basket of eggs, and you already got somebody in mind to give 'em to, and it's the widow Alderdice, and you mean to do it tomorrow." Hannah didn't deny it. "Her youngest's been poorly," she said quietly. "Maggie told me at the gate. Little Sam, he's not eating, and I've got 3 dozen goose eggs and a bundle of yarrow sitting on my table that the good Lord practically walked me to by the hand, and I am not going to sit on it while a child goes hungry a mile down the road." She lifted her chin. "So yes, tomorrow. And you can help me, or you can watch me, but I'm going." Ethan looked at her a long moment. "I married a landslide," he said. "You married a woman who's done waiting by the wall." She reached up and covered one of his hands with hers. "Help me carry it, Ethan. That's all I'm asking. Help me carry it." He did. They went to the Alderdice place the next afternoon, with a basket of eggs and a story ready. And the story was the hard part, because Hannah Carter had never in her life been an easy liar. But she'd worked it out on the drive, a spring high on their land that ran warm and never froze. It had been there all along, she'd say. They'd only just thought to check it in the drought. It was small, but it was steady, and there was more than 2 people needed, and what were neighbors for? Maggie met them at the gate with a rifle. She lowered it when she saw who it was. "Sorry," Maggie said, not sounding it. "Vance came by again this morning. Told me the judge is coming through in 3 weeks, and when he does, the bank's putting my note before him, and there won't be a thing I can do about it. Said it like he was doing me a favor telling me early." Her voice shook, and she hated that it shook. Hannah could see her hating it. 3 weeks, Hannah. 3 weeks and I'm out, me and 3 children, and where in God's name do I go?" "You don't go anywhere," Hannah said, "because you've got the receipts and the receipts are true, and a forged note doesn't stand up when there's a stamped receipt against it. Judge or no judge." "You don't know that judge." "No. But I know the law's supposed to work both ways, and I mean to hold it to that." Hannah set the basket down on the gate. "But that's 3 weeks off, and this is now. Where's Sam?" Maggie's face changed. "Inside. He's not right, Hannah. He won't eat, he's hot to the touch, he cries in his sleep. And there's no getting the doctor's 40 miles at the county seat, and he don't come for folks that can't pay." She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "I lost his father to a fever I couldn't doctor. I can't lose him too. I can't." You're not going to." Hannah picked the basket back up and pushed through the gate. "Let me see him." Little Sam Alderdice was 4 years old and burning up. Hannah knelt by his pallet and put her hand on his forehead and felt the heat coming off him, and something in her went very steady and very calm, the way it did when the moment was too big for panic to be any use. She'd nursed fevers before. Her mother had taught her back before the church socials, and the laughing back when Hannah was just a big-boned girl following her mama around the sick rooms of a Missouri town, learning which plant did what. "Maggie, I need hot water and a clean cloth, and I need it now." Hannah dug in her basket and brought out the yarrow, and Maggie stared at it. "What is that?" "Medicine. My mama's kind." Hannah was already crushing the leaves between her fingers. "You steep it into a tea strong, and you cool it, and you get as much of it into him as he'll take sip by sip through the night. It breaks a fever. I've seen it break worse than this." She looked up. "You trust me, Maggie." Maggie Alderdice looked at the strange feathered leaves in Hannah's scarred hands, and then at her burning child, and then at Hannah's face. "God help me," Maggie whispered. "I don't have a choice but to." They worked over the boy all afternoon and into the dark. Hannah dosed him and cooled him and dosed him again, and Ethan sat out on the porch with his rifle across his knees, keeping watch on the road because he'd be damned if Vance was going to catch them here without warning. And the other 2 children huddled in the corner watching their brother fight, and Maggie held Sam's little hand and prayed. Near midnight, the fever broke. It broke the way fevers do. All at once, the boy suddenly soaked with sweat and shaking, and then blessedly cool. Sam opened his eyes and blinked up at the 2 women leaning over him and said in the small, cracked voice of a child who'd been away somewhere and come back, "Mama, I'm hungry." Maggie Alderdice made the sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, and gathered her boy up against her, and she rocked him, and she wept into his damp hair, and over the top of his head, she looked at Hannah with an expression Hannah would remember the rest of her days. "You saved him," Maggie said. "Hannah, you saved my boy's life." "The medicine did." "Don't." Maggie's voice was fierce through the tears. "Don't you do that. Don't you make yourself small in my kitchen after what you just did. You saved him. Say it. Let me thank the right person." Hannah opened her mouth to deflect it, the way she deflected everything, the way a lifetime of being laughed at had taught her to duck her head before anyone could. And then she thought of the cave and the water, and the green growing things kept warm in the dark, and she thought that mountain didn't hide its light. It just waited for somebody worthy to carry it out. "All right," Hannah said quietly. "I saved him. And I'd do it again 100 times over. And there's more where that came from, Maggie. There's medicine, and there's food, and there's water enough to see this whole valley through the winter, and I aim to see that it does." She reached out and touched the sleeping boy's cheek. "Nobody else dies of a fever in this valley, while I've got 2 hands to fight it. Nobody." Maggie caught those 2 hands and held them. "Where's it coming from, Hannah?" she said softly. "The truth now. Not the spring story. I saw your face when you said it. You're a terrible liar. God love you. Where's it really coming from?" And there it was. The first test of the secret come sooner than Hannah had feared from the last person she wanted to lie to. Hannah looked at Maggie Alderdice, this fierce, small widow who'd just handed her a dying child on nothing but faith, and she wanted so badly to tell her. She wanted to share the wonder of it. The water and the light wanted it the way you want to show someone you love a beautiful thing. But she thought of Vance in the road. She thought of Thorne's smile that never reached his eyes, and she thought a secret's only a secret while 2 people hold it and no more. "Maggie," Hannah said, "I'm going to ask you to trust me one more time, and it's a harder thing than the medicine. I'm going to ask you not to ask me that question, not because I don't love you, because I do. Because the less you know about where it comes from, the safer you are and your children are when Vance comes asking. And he will come asking. If a man like Thorne ever gets wind that there's help flowing into this valley he can't account for, he'll tear it apart to find the source. And I don't want you standing anywhere near it when he does." She squeezed Maggie's hands. "Can you do that? Can you take the help and thank God for it, and not ask me where it comes from?" Maggie searched her face for a long moment. "There's something up on your land," she said slowly. Isn't there? Something the drought didn't touch. Maggie, I won't ask. Maggie let out a breath. I won't. But you listen to me now, Hannah Carter, because I've buried a husband, and I know exactly what this valley's men are capable of when there's money in it. Her eyes were hard and clear. Whatever it is you've found, you keep it close. You keep it closer than you're keeping it now, because I'd have never guessed it if I hadn't watched you lie about it just now. But there'll be others watching, and some of them won't love you like I do. Some of them will be watching for the exact thing you're trying to hide. She let go of Hannah's hands. Now, you and that good man of yours get on home before the sheriff finds your wagon in my yard. And Hannah. She caught her at the door. Thank you, for my boy. I'll go to my grave owing you, and I'll spend every day between now and then being your friend. You've got precious few in this valley. You've got one for life in me. They drove home under the stars, and Hannah didn't say much, and Ethan let her not say much. But halfway home she reached over and took his hand off the reins and held it, and he let her, and she said, That's why. That's the whole why right there. Little Sam Alderdice saying he was hungry. Everything we do from here on, everything we risk, that's what it's for. I know it, Ethan said. I was on the porch. I heard him. Then you know we can't stop. I never said stop. He squeezed her hand. I said guard it. There's a difference. And Maggie's right, Hannah. We gotta guard it better than we are. That business tonight, us sitting in her yard till midnight with the wagon in plain view, we got lucky. We can't run on luck. Luck runs out. He didn't know how right he was. The weeks that followed taught Hannah Carter that a secret is a living thing, and living things have to be fed, and the feeding of them costs. They went up to the cave in the gray hour before dawn, never the same way twice just as she'd sworn. Ethan took the eastern draw, where the rocks gave cover. Hannah took the long way around by the deer trail. They learned the cave the way Hannah had said they would like scripture, and she kept a journal of it in a hand that grew surer with every entry, because a woman who had never once been asked her opinion found she had a great deal to say to a page. She wrote down where the geese nested, and made a rule never that ground, never those eggs. She wrote down how high the pool stood on the smooth stone, and marked it with a scratched line so she'd know from 1 week to the next whether they were taking more than the mountain could give back. She wrote down the plants and which cured what, and drew them careful so she'd never mistake the healing yarrow for anything that wasn't. And one gray morning she learned the hardest lesson the mountain had to teach. They'd gotten greedy, not for themselves, for the valley. The Pruitt family down the South Fork had 3 sick and a dry well, and the Hendersons had lost their garden entire, and Hannah had lain awake doing sums in the dark, and she'd told Ethan they needed to carry more, a lot more all at once, get ahead of the need, before winter closed the roads. So they took more. They filled every skin and every jar and 2 barrels besides, and they hauled it out over 3 hard trips in a single morning, and Hannah was proud of the haul. Proud right up until she came back for the last load and stopped dead at the edge of the biggest pool. The water had dropped. Her scratched line stood a full hand above the surface. Ethan? Her voice came out strange. Ethan, come look. He came. He saw the line. He saw the water below it. That's from this morning, Hannah said. That's us. We did that in 1 morning. She knelt at the pool's edge and put her hand in, and the water was still warm, still clear, but it was lower, and something about it being lower made her stomach turn over. The falls aren't filling it back fast enough. We took faster than it gives. So we took too much. We took too much. She sat back on her heels, and the pride went out of her all at once, replaced by a cold, clear shame. Tom Pryor said it, Ethan. Never take more than you give back. The Shoshone woman knew it 60 years ago, and I forgot it in 3 weeks because I got scared about winter. She stared at the dropped water. This place isn't a bank you can empty. It's alive. It's got a heart, and it beats at its own speed, and if I take faster than it beats, I'll kill the very thing I'm trying to save the valley with. She looked up at him stricken. I almost did. This morning, I almost loved these people to death. Hey, Ethan crouched and took her by the shoulders. It dropped a hand. It'll come back. You caught it, Hannah. That's the thing. You marked the line so you'd catch it, and you caught it. And if I hadn't marked it... He didn't answer that because there wasn't a kind answer to it. New rule, Hannah said quietly, and she took out her journal right there and wrote it down, her hand not quite steady. 1 skin per household per week. No barrels, no getting ahead. We give what the mountain gives and not 1 drop more. And if that's not enough to save everybody, then we save who we can. And we don't lie to ourselves that we can save the world by draining the well that does the saving. She closed the journal. That's the discipline of it. That's the part Thorne could never do, not in 100 years, because a man like Thorne only knows how to take everything. And the mountain doesn't give everything. It gives enough. There's a whole different way of living hidden in that one word, Ethan. Enough. They carried the 2 barrels back and poured them out along the high edge of their own dead field where it would seep back down toward the crack in time, and Hannah watched the precious water sink into the dust and felt it as a kind of penance, and she never made that mistake again. And slowly, quietly, family by family, the valley began to refuse to die. It didn't happen all at once, and that was the beauty and the safety of it. A well that should have failed kept a little water. A garden that should have burned kept a little green. A child that should have sickened stayed well, or a child that sickened got better. Nobody could point to it. Nobody could name it. It was just that the dying which had felt so certain a month ago quietly stopped being certain here and there, in 1s and 2s, all across the low end of the valley, where the carters made their careful midnight rounds. And people began to talk. Hannah heard it first at the mercantile of all places, standing at the counter, while Amos Kettleman weighed her flour. Strange doings down the valley. Amos said low, not looking at her. The Hendersons was set to sell last week. Told me so themselves, standing right where you are. Then they didn't. Came in yesterday and paid down their account in coin and said they'd changed their minds, they was staying. He measured the flour careful. And the Pruitt young ones was sick unto death a fortnight past. Everybody knew it. Now they're up and playing in the yard. He glanced at her quick, then away. Folks are saying there's a spring somewhere the drought didn't touch. Folks are saying somebody's carrying help around this valley in the dark. Hannah kept her face very still. Folks say a lot of things. They do. Amos wrapped the flour. And most of it don't matter. But you want to know who else is listening to what folks say, Mrs. Carter? He leaned in, and his scared eyes were dead serious. Silas Thorne. He was in here yesterday, asking Amos Kettleman real friendly questions about which families changed their minds about selling, writing down names, smiling that smile. Amos pushed the flour across the counter. Now, I don't know what you know, and I don't want to know. And I'm going to forget I said a word of this the second you walk out my door. But if I was somebody who happened to be doing a kindness in the dark, I'd know that the wolf has caught the scent. That's all. That's all I'll say. Hannah walked out of the mercantile with her heart pounding and her flour under her arm and her face a mask, and she did not let herself hurry, did not let herself look back until she'd climbed up beside Ethan, and they were 3 streets clear of the bank. He knows, she said. Not the where, but the that. Thorne knows somebody's keeping this valley alive, and he's writing down every name we've touched. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. Then we've touched too many. We touched the ones that were dying. Hannah's jaw set. I won't apologize for the Pruitt children being alive, but you're right. We left a trail. Every family that changed its mind about selling is a footprint pointing back toward us, and Thorne's smart enough to follow footprints. She stared straight ahead down the road. We have to be cleverer. We have to spread it out, make it look like weather, like luck, like anything but 2 people on a wagon. And we have to be ready, Ethan, because sooner or later that man is going to come up our road and look us in the eye, and when he does, there can't be one single thing out of place for him to catch hold of. He came up their road 4 days later. Hannah was in the yard when she saw the dust, 2 riders coming slow and easy, and she knew before she could make out their faces. She knew by the way her stomach dropped. She set down the wash and walked to the middle of the yard and planted herself, and she called over her shoulder, calm as she could. "Ethan, we've got company." He came out of the barn wiping his hands and stood beside her, and the two of them waited while Silas Thorne and Sheriff Boyd Vance rode into their yard and drew up their horses and sat there a moment looking down, letting the height of the saddle do its work the way such men always did. "Mrs. Carter." Thorne touched his hat. "Mr. Carter, what a pretty piece of ground you've got up here." He looked around slow, taking it in, and his eyes missed nothing. "Higher than I remembered. Closer to the mountains. A man forgets from down in town just how far up you folks are." "What do you want, Thorne?" Ethan said. "Directness. I do admire it." Thorne swung down off his horse, unhurried, and Vance stayed mounted, his hand resting easy near his gun watching. "I'll match it. Your note's due in 2 weeks and a day. Mr. Carter, $240. And I've come up here myself personal out of respect to ask you one last time to take the bank's fair offer and spare yourself the humiliation of a foreclosure." He smiled. $60. Walk away whole." "We're not selling," Hannah said. Thorne turned to her with that patient, poisonous courtesy. "Mrs. Carter, with respect. Your well is nearly dry. Your field is dead. Your creek hasn't run in 2 months. $240 might as well be $240,000 for all the chance you have of raising it." He spread his hands all reason. "I'm not your enemy. I'm the only man in this valley telling you the truth. You cannot survive up here. Sell. Take the money. Save yourselves." "And yet," Hannah said, "here we are, surviving." Something flickered in Thorne's eyes. "You're thinner than you were." She went on, and she took a slow step toward him, and Ethan let her, though she felt him tense. "You noticed it too, didn't you, riding up? You looked at our field and it's dead, and you looked at our well and it's dry, and you looked at us and we're not dead, Mr. Thorne. We're not dying. 2 people you swore couldn't survive the summer standing in our own yard, fed and watered and refusing to sell." She stopped an arm's length from him. "That's what's really eating you, not the note. The note's just paper. What's eating you is that you can't figure out how we're still here. And it's driving you half out of your mind because a man who thinks he's arranged for a whole valley to starve can't abide the sight of somebody who won't." The yard went very still. Vance's hand drifted an inch closer to his gun. Thorne looked at Hannah for a long, cold moment, and the courtesy peeled back off his face like bark off a dead tree, and underneath it was the thing she'd seen in the street that first day, the thing that looked at people the way it looked at locks. "You're a clever woman," Thorne said softly. "Cleverer than you've any right to be given your circumstances. And I'll tell you what I think since we're being direct." He took a step of his own, closing the space, and his voice dropped so that only she and Ethan could hear it. "I think there's water on this valley's high ground that shouldn't be there. I think somebody's found it. And I think that somebody is carrying it around in the dark, playing at being the Good Samaritan, keeping alive a dozen farms that ought by every law of God and drought to be mine by now." His eyes bored into hers. "I've spent 2 years and a great deal of money arranging the death of this valley, Mrs. Carter. 2 years. And I will not be undone by a fat homesteader's wife in a bucket." Ethan moved. He didn't say a word. He just stepped forward and put himself between Thorne and Hannah, slow and deliberate. And he looked Silas Thorne in the eye from a foot away, and the whole yard held its breath. "You want to say that word again?" Ethan said quietly. "The one you called my wife. Go on. Say it with the sheriff watching. See if his badge is worth what you're paying for it." Vance's gun cleared leather an inch, and Hannah put her hand on Ethan's arm, and she said very calm into the terrible silence, "Let him go, Ethan." "Hannah, let him go. He's said his piece, and he's got no proof of a word of it, or he'd not be up here talking. He'd be up here with a claim and a marshal." She looked past her husband at Thorne, and she smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent her whole life being underestimated and had learned at last to use it like a blade. "You've got nothing, Mr. Thorne. You've got a suspicion and a bad feeling, and a note that's still got 2 weeks to run. And in 2 weeks when that note comes due, you're going to be surprised. Now get off our land. You're not welcome on it, and you never will be. And someday you'll understand exactly how unwelcome, but not today. Today you just ride. Thorn held her eyes a moment longer. Then he smiled and put his hat back on and mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who has never once in his life been made to hurry. 2 weeks, he said. I do look forward to your surprise, Mrs. Carter. I have a feeling it'll be quite something. He gathered his reins. Sheriff, I believe we're done here. He looked down at them one last time. Do give my regards to the widow Alderdice when next you visit her, which I understand is often. And he turned his horse and rode out of the yard, and Vance backed his own horse a few steps before turning, keeping them in his sight until the last, and then the two of them were gone down the road in a thread of dust. Hannah's knees nearly went. Ethan caught her elbow. He knows about Maggie, she whispered. He knows we go there. He's watching us. He's been watching us the whole time. He's guessing. He's guessing right. She turned to Ethan, and for the first time since the cave, real fear was in her face. That last bit about Maggie, that wasn't a guess, Ethan, that was a threat. He's telling us he knows where we go and who we help, and he's telling us he can reach them. If he can't prove the water's ours, he'll come at us through the people we're trying to save. Her hand went to her mouth. Maggie. And her note before the judge in 2 weeks. Oh, Ethan. He's going to make an example of her. He's going to take the Alderdice farm right in front of us to show us what happens to people we care about, and there won't be a thing we can do to stop it without giving ourselves away. Ethan was quiet a moment. Then we don't give ourselves away, he said, and we stop him anyway. How? The receipts. He turned her to face him. You told Maggie to hide 'em. You told her they're the one true thing standing between Thorn and her farm. So that's how. We don't fight him with water. We fight him with paper in front of that judge in the open where the whole town can see. A forged note against a stamped receipt. You said it yourself first day. It's a hanging crime. His jaw set. Thorn thinks he's going to make an example of Maggie. Let's you and me make an example of him. Hannah looked at her husband, this quiet man who did nothing fast, and she felt the fear in her turn slowly into something with a spine. 2 weeks. She said. 2 weeks. Then we've got 2 weeks to build a case that a bought judge can't ignore. She wiped her face and stood up straight and planted herself, and the fear was still there, but it was underneath her now instead of on top. We're going to need every receipt in this valley, Ethan, not just Maggie's. Every family Thorn's foreclosed on, every note he's called, every number he's changed. If he forged Maggie's, he forged others. And if we can show the judge a pattern, 1 forgery's a mistake, but a dozen's a conspiracy, and no judge, bought or not, can look at a dozen forgeries in front of a whole town and rule for the bank without hanging himself alongside. She started for the cabin. Hitch the wagon. We're going to see every family in this valley that ever borrowed from Silas Thorn. And this time we're not carrying water. We're carrying a rope, and we mean to hand him the end of it. The gathering of the receipts was slower and uglier work than the carrying of the water had ever been, because water saved people and paper frightened them. The first 3 families turned Hannah away at the door. I'm not putting my name against that man, said Cyrus Pruitt, whose children Hannah had kept alive with the cave's clean water, and he could not look at her while he said it. You saved my young ones, Mrs. Carter, and I'll thank God for you every day I live. But Silas Thorn holds the note on this farm, same as he holds yours. And if I stand up in front of that judge and call him a forger, and it don't stick, he'll have me out on the road by Sunday out of pure spite. I've got 5 children. I can't. I'm sorry. God knows I'm sorry. And he shut the door gentle like it hurt him to do it. Hannah stood on the Pruitt porch with her fist half raised to knock again, and Ethan touched her shoulder. He's scared, Hannah. Can't hate a man for being scared. I don't hate him. She lowered her fist. I understand him. That's the worst part. Every one of them's going to say the same thing, and every one of them's going to be right to say it, because that's how Thorn wins Ethan. Not with the sheriff, not with the forgery, with the fear. He's got a whole valley so scared of him that they'll watch a widow lose her farm before they'll risk a word. Her voice cracked. How do you fight that? How do you fight a man whose real weapon is that everybody's already given up? You find the one who hasn't. Hannah turned. What? Somewhere in this valley, Ethan said slowly, there's a man Thorne's already ruined. Somebody with nothing left to lose because Thorne already took it. That man's not scared, Hannah, because scared is for people who've still got something to protect. He looked out over the failing land. Fear keeps the ones who've still got a farm. But the ones Thorne already broke, they don't fear him. They hate him, and hate'll stand up in a courtroom when fear won't. Hannah stared at her quiet husband. Josiah Meade, she said. Who? Josiah Meade. He kept Thorne's books, Ethan, for years before we ever came here. Amos mentioned him once. Thorne turned him out, ruined him. Put it about that Meade was a drunk and a thief so no one else would hire him. He lives in that shack past the tannery now, drinks up whatever he can beg. Her eyes were kindling. A man who kept the bank's books, who knows exactly how Thorne changes the numbers, because he watched him do it, maybe helped him do it before Thorne threw him away. She grabbed Ethan's arm. If anybody in this valley knows where the true ledger is, the real one before Thorne cooks it, it's Josiah Meade, and Josiah Meade hasn't got one single thing left for Thorne to take. They found him in the shack past the tannery, and he was exactly as ruined as the rumors said, and worse. He wouldn't open the door at first. Then Hannah told him through the wood that she had a bottle and a proposition, and the bottle was true, and it opened the door, and they sat with Josiah Meade in the wreck of his one room, while he drank and shook and eyed them like a beaten dog, eyes a raised hand. You're the Carter woman, Meade said, the one that won't sell. The whole town's talking about you. He laughed an awful rattling sound. Thorne hates you. Did you know that truly hates you? I heard he came home from your place white in the face. Whatever you said to him, lady, you're the first soul in 10 years put a crack in that smile. He took a long pull. So, what do you want with a dead man? The truth, Hannah said. About the notes, about how he changes them. Meade went still. You want to get yourself killed, he said quietly. That's what you want, because that's what asking that question gets you in this town. He's going to take the Alderdice farm in 2 weeks, Hannah said. A widow with 3 children. He forged her note, and he's putting it before the circuit judge, and he'll win because everyone's too afraid to stand against him. Everyone but you, Mr. Meade. You're already dead, you said so yourself. So I'm asking a dead man to do the one thing the living are too scared to do. She leaned in. Tell me how he does it, and tell me where the real books are. Josiah Meade looked at her for a long, long time, and something moved behind his ruined eyes. Some ember the drink hadn't quite drowned, and Hannah understood she was looking at a man who had been waiting years for someone to ask him this exact question. 2 ledgers, Meade said at last very low. There's always 2. The one he shows and the one that's true. He keeps the false one in the bank, out where anyone can see all clean numbers and honest looking. But the true one, the one that shows what folks really paid and when and how much he skimmed and forged and stole. Meade's hand shook so hard he spilled the bottle. That one he keeps in the safe in his house. Not the bank. His house. Because he's not fool enough to leave the thing that could hang him where a clerk might find it. He wiped his mouth. I know it's there because I'm the one who taught him to keep it there. God forgive me. I kept those 2 sets of books for 6 years before he decided a witness was more dangerous than a bookkeeper was useful. His voice broke. He took everything I had, lady. My name, my trade. My wife wouldn't stay married to a ruined drunk, and who could blame her? He looked up, and the ember was aflame now. You get me a way to stand in front of that judge without Thorne's men shooting me on the courthouse steps first, and I'll tell the whole world where that second ledger is, and what's in it, and how I know. I'll die doing it. I don't care. I've been dead 10 years anyhow. At least this way I die meaning something. Hannah reached across the filthy table and took Josiah Meade's shaking hand in both of hers. You're not going to die, she said. You're going to testify, and then you're going to get your name back. I swear it to you on my own life, Mr. Meade. You help me hang Silas Thorne with his own true ledger, and I will spend the rest of my days making sure this valley knows Josiah Meade was the man who broke him. Not the drunk. The man. She squeezed his hand. Now, can you write down what you just told me? All of it in your own hand, dated, signed, I can. Then write it, tonight, and hide it where no one but you can find it, and don't you dare drink yourself past being able to stand in 2 weeks, because I am going to need you standing, Josiah Meade. I am going to need you standing up straight in front of God and the county and every coward who ever crossed the street to avoid you. She stood. 2 weeks. Stay alive. Stay sober enough. That's all I ask. They left him weeping over a fresh sheet of paper, and it was the first useful thing his hands had done in 10 years, and Hannah knew it, and Meade knew it, and the knowing of it was its own kind of medicine. Outside in the dark, Ethan looked at his wife with something like awe. You did that, he said. You walked into a dead man's shack, and you brought him back to life with a bottle and a promise. The mountain taught me, Hannah said. You don't take from people, Ethan. You give them enough. Enough water. Enough hope. Enough of a reason. She climbed up onto the wagon. Josiah Meade didn't need saving. He needed a purpose. Same as I did standing by that wall when I was 16. Same as this whole valley. She took up the reins. Now let's get home. We've got a case to build, and 2 weeks to build it, and I've got a feeling Silas Thorne isn't going to sit quiet while we build it. She was right about that too. They came for Ethan 3 days later at dawn before the coffee was even on. Hannah heard the horses and knew the way she always knew now, and she was at the door before Vance's fist hit it. She opened it on the sheriff and 2 deputies and the gray morning behind them, and Vance had a paper in his hand and a look on his face that said he took no pleasure in this. And Hannah believed the look, and it frightened her more than pleasure would have. Ethan Carter. Vance held up the paper. Warrant for your arrest. Theft of cattle. 4 head off the Thorn Range 3 nights past. Ethan came up behind Hannah half-dressed, and he laughed once short and disbelieving. Thorn Range. I haven't been within 5 miles of Thorn's Range in a month, and you know it, Boyd. I know what the warrant says. Vance wouldn't meet his eyes. There's a witness swears he saw you drive 4 head off Thorn's north pasture. Judge signed it last night, first thing he did when he rode into the county. You'll answer it at the hearing. He nodded to the deputies. Take him. On what witness? Hannah stepped in front of her husband. Whose word? Name him, Vance. Name the liar to my face. It'll come out at the hearing, Mrs. Carter. It's Thorne. It's a witness Thorne bought, same as he bought that warrant, same as he bought you. Hannah. Ethan's voice, quiet and steady, cut through her fear. He put his hands on her shoulders and turned her around to face him gentle, while the deputies waited. Hannah, look at me. Don't. They can't, Ethan. They can't just... They can and they are, and fighting it in this yard just gives them a reason to fight back with more than paper. He looked into her eyes, calm as the cave water. You see what he's doing, don't you? You see it. He can't find the water. He can't prove the water. So he's pulling me out of your way. He wants you alone. He wants you scared and alone and running to help me, so you'll be too busy to stand up for Maggie, too busy to build the case, too busy to think. His hands tightened. Don't give it to him. You hear me? Don't you dare come running after me. You stay. You finish it. You do the thing we came home to do, and you let me sit in that cell, because a cell's just a room. Hannah and I'll walk out of it the day you put Thorne's true ledger in front of that judge. Hannah's eyes were streaming. I can't do it without you. You've been doing it without anybody your whole life. He kissed her forehead slow in front of the sheriff and the deputies and God. Now do it with a whole valley behind you. Finish it, Hannah. And I'll be there when you're done, same as always. They took him then. He didn't fight. He went with his head up and his hands loose, and he looked back at her once from the road, and then they were gone, and Hannah Carter stood alone in her yard, in the gray dawn, with the coffee not even on. She let herself weep for exactly as long as it took the horses to disappear. Then she wiped her face, and she went inside, and she stoked the fire, and she made the coffee, because a woman alone with a valley to save still had to eat. And while it boiled, she stood at the window and made herself think cold and clear, the way the mountain had taught her, and she understood 2 things. The first was that Ethan was right. Thorne had pulled him out to leave her alone and frightened, and the worst thing she could do, The exact thing Thorne wanted was to spend the next 2 weeks weeping at the jailhouse door instead of building the case. The second was that she was out of water. She checked the skins hanging in the cool of the root cellar, and there were 3 left, 3 days' worth for the families most in need, and after that, nothing until she carried more out of the mountain. And she couldn't carry it in daylight. And she couldn't carry it with Ethan taking the eastern draw while she took the deer trail, because Ethan was in a cell, and there was no Ethan. There was only Hannah alone, and the cave 4 hard miles up a ridge in the dark. She looked at the 3 skins a long time. The Alderdice children needed the water. The Pruitt young ones needed it. And little Sam, who'd said he was hungry, who was the whole reason for all of it. Sam still had a cough that the cave's mint tea kept from turning back into the fever. And if she ran dry now, if she let the fear of the dark and the fear of Vance's watching keep her home, then a child might sicken who didn't have to, and she would have let Silas Thorne win the only way he could really win, which was by making her too afraid to do the good she'd found the means to do. "No," Hannah said out loud to her empty cabin. "No, you don't get that too." She was still standing at the window with the fire crackling when a wagon came up her road at noon, and her heart leapt and then fell because it wasn't Ethan. It was Maggie Alderdice, driving hard with her 3 children packed in the bed. Maggie was down and across the yard before the horse had fully stopped. "I heard," Maggie said, taking Hannah by both arms. "The whole valley's heard. Cattle theft on Ethan of all the men God ever made, Ethan Carter, who'd walk a stray calf home to a neighbor in the rain. It's a lie, and everybody knows it's a lie, and nobody'll say so, because it's Thorne's lie." Her eyes searched Hannah's face. "Are you all right? Tell me true. Are you all right up here alone?" And Hannah, who had spent a lifetime telling everyone she was fine, who had told Ethan she was fine, in a dead creek with her hands bleeding, opened her mouth to say she was fine, and instead she said, "No, no, Maggie, I'm not." And Maggie Alderdice pulled her in and held her, this small, fierce widow, holding up a woman twice her size, and it did not matter one bit that Hannah was bigger because grief has no size, and Maggie held all of it. "He did it to get at me," Hannah said into her friend's shoulder. "He took Ethan to leave me alone and scared. And it's working, Maggie. That's the shame of it. It's working. I've never been so scared in all my life." "Course you're scared." Maggie pulled back and held her at arm's length, and her own eyes were wet, but her voice was steel. "Only a fool wouldn't be. But you listened to me, Hannah Carter. You came to my gate when my Sam was dying, and you didn't leave till the fever broke. You sat in my kitchen at midnight with the sheriff liable to ride up any minute, and you didn't leave. You've got no idea, do you, what you look like to the rest of us? You think you're the woman by the wall. You're not. You're the only soul in this whole valley Silas Thorne is afraid of, and he's afraid of you because you're the only one who won't run." She gripped harder. "So he took your man. All right. That's a cruel, low, cowardly thing, and it tells you you're winning because a man who's winning don't need to stoop that low. Now what do you need? Tell me. Whatever it is. My children can mind themselves for a night, and I've got 2 good hands, and I owe you a life. What do you need?" Hannah looked at her friend for a long moment, and the fear didn't leave her, but it made room the way it had at the mouth of the crack for something with a spine. "I need you to take these children home and keep them safe," Hannah said quietly. "And I need you to not ask me where I'm going tonight or what I'm doing. Same as before. Can you still not ask?" Maggie's jaw tightened. She glanced up once toward the high ground and the old cliff, and something passed over her face, and Hannah saw that Maggie had guessed a good deal more than she ever let on. "I cannot ask," Maggie said. "But I'll say one thing and then never again. Whatever's up there, Hannah." She nodded barely toward the ridge. "You be careful with it tonight. Careful as you've ever been. Because Ethan's not up there to catch you if you fall, and I couldn't bear to lose you both in 1 week." She kissed Hannah's cheek hard. "Come back down that mountain. That's all. Come back down." Then she gathered her children and drove away, and Hannah was alone again, but not the same kind of alone. She waited for full dark. She took the lantern, but she didn't light it. She took Ethan's rifle, because he'd told her to all that time ago at the mouth of the crack, and she took the empty skins slung over her shoulder, and she went up the ridge alone in the black, with the moon behind cloud. and it was the most frightened she had ever been in her life. And she went anyway. She took the deer trail because it was the one she knew. She fell twice. She tore her palm on a rock, and it was the same palm she'd split, digging in the dead creek a lifetime ago. And she thought, this valley keeps asking for my blood, and I keep giving it, and she climbed on. She talked to Ethan the whole way up under her breath, though he was miles off in a cell, told him she was doing it, told him she was almost there, told him he'd better be all right, or she'd break him out herself, and to hell with the judge. And the talking got her up the ridge one frightened foot after another until the black bulk of the old cliff rose up against the barely lighter sky, and she was there. She stopped to catch her breath at the base of the last rise, one hand against the cold rock, the skins dragging at her shoulder. And that was when the moon came out from behind its cloud. It came out all at once the way it had the night they'd hidden from Vance, and it laid a thin silver light down over the base of the cliff, over the fall of dry brush that hid the crack over the patch of dust at the mouth of the mountain where Hannah and Ethan had crawled through a dozen times. And Hannah stopped breathing, because there in the dust plain in the moonlight were boot prints, not hers, not Ethan's. Big prints, a man's deep-heeled coming up to the crack from a direction neither of them had ever used. And the brush that hid the opening, the brush she and Ethan had so carefully arranged and rearranged every single time, pulling it back into place behind them like drawing a curtain, the brush was torn aside, pulled loose, thrown down. Hannah sank low against the rock, the rifle coming up in her hands without her telling it to, her heart slamming so hard she was sure it could be heard across the whole silent ridge. She made herself breathe. She made herself look. And she crept closer one slow step at a time, keeping to the shadow until she was near enough to read the ground. The prints came up to the crack, and they did not come back. Whoever it was had gone in. And by the look of the torn brush, by the way the dust had already been walked over more than once, they had gone in more than tonight. This was not one visit. Somebody had found the mountain days ago, maybe longer, and had been coming and going while she and Ethan slept 4 miles below, thinking their one secret was safe. Thinking the one thing keeping them alive was still theirs alone. It wasn't. Hannah crouched at the mouth of the crack with her husband in a cell, and her friends hearing 11 days off, and the empty skins hanging useless from her shoulder, and she stared into the black seam in the stone, where the warm, wet wind still rose the same as ever, patient, alive, indifferent to who knew of it now. And from somewhere deep inside the mountain, past the dark, past the reach of any light she carried, came a sound that was not the water and was not the geese. It was a man's voice, and it was singing. Hannah stood at the mouth of the crack with the rifle in her 2 hands, and the singing coming up out of the dark, and every sensible thing in her said, "Turn around, go down the mountain, run." And she thought of Ethan in his cell telling her to finish it. And she thought of the way that voice was singing low and cracked and unafraid, an old hymn her own mother used to sing over the sick, and no man bent on harm sings hymns to himself in the belly of a mountain. "Whoever you are," Hannah called into the dark, and her voice shook only a little. "I've got a rifle, and I know how to use it, and this is my mountain. You come out slow with your hands where I can see them, or you don't come out at all." The singing stopped. For a moment, there was only the water and the warm wind. Then a voice came back up out of the dark, thin and amused and old as the hills. "Your mountain," said the voice. "That's rich. This here mountain was keeping folks alive before your grandmother was a gleam girl. But come on down. Bring your rifle if it comforts you. I'm too old to be shot at and too tired to run, and I've been waiting on you a good long while." Hannah knew the voice. She went down through the crack and out into the green glow with the rifle still up, and there, sitting on a flat, warm stone at the edge of the biggest pool with his boots off and his old feet in the steaming water, was Tom Pryor. "You," Hannah breathed. She lowered the rifle. "Tom Pryor. How in God's name?" "Followed the geese." Tom didn't turn around. He was looking out over the water, and the green light was on his ancient face, and he looked, Hannah thought, more peaceful than she'd ever seen a living man look. "Took me 3 days to climb, what used to take me half a morning. Fell more times than I'll admit. But I followed the geese same as I did 60 years ago, same as I told you they went up when everything else was starving." He finally looked at her, and his rheumy eyes were wet. "I had to see it one more time before I died, girl. That's the whole truth of it. I'm dying. Been dying all summer. And I couldn't go into the ground without putting my feet in this warm water one last time and singing my wife's hymn to the only thing in this world that ever kept its promises." Hannah set the rifle down against the rock and came and sat beside him, and she didn't know what to say, so she said the true thing. "I thought you were somebody Thorne sent." "I know you did." Tom wiggled his old toes in the water. "That's why I'm glad it was you found me and not the other way round. You've got the fear in you now, the right kind, the kind that keeps a secret alive. 60 years I kept this place secret with that same fear. Never told a soul. Not my wives, not the preacher, not one living person, because I knew what men would do to it." He looked at her. "And then a dry summer comes, and half the valley's dying, and I'm too old to carry a single skin of water down that ridge, and I lay in my bed at night, knowing the cure for the whole valley's misery was sitting up here in the dark, and I couldn't do a blessed thing about it. You know what that's like, girl, to know where the mercy is and not be able to carry it." "I know the opposite of it," Hannah said quietly. "I know what it's like to be able to carry it and be terrified the whole time that carrying it'll get everybody killed." Tom Pryor laughed, wheezing. "Then we're the two people in this valley who understand each other best, and we only just met proper." He sobered. "I guessed it was you, you know. The day you came to my fence asking about the mountain with that look on your face. I knew you'd found it. And I lied and said I hadn't followed the geese in 30 years, and you lied and said you'd just lost your flock. And we sat there lying to each other, because we both knew exactly what was at stake." He reached over and put his old spotted hand on top of hers. "You did right to lie to me, girl, but you don't have to anymore. Because I'm on my way out of this world, and a dying man's the safest place in creation to set down a secret. Whatever you need, whatever you know, whatever's coming. Tell old Tom. I'll carry it to the grave, and the grave's not far." And so Hannah told him. She told him all of it, sitting there with her feet next to his in the warm water, the words pouring out of her like the falls pouring down the far wall. Ethan in a cell on a forged charge. Thorne buying the valley dead. Maggie's forged note and the hearing coming. Josiah Meade and the 2 ledgers. She told him she was one woman alone against a bank and a bought sheriff and a circuit judge in Thorne's pocket, and she told him she was afraid she'd finally met the thing too big for her to plant her feet against. Tom Pryor listened to every word, and when she was done, he was quiet a long time, and then he began softly to laugh. "What?" Hannah said. "What's funny?" "None of it's funny, Tom." Silas Thorne. Tom wiped his eyes. "Buying up the high ground for the water, forging notes to steal the valley. And you want to know the joke of it, girl? The joke that's so good it's near worth dying to tell." He leaned close, and his old voice dropped, and his eyes were suddenly sharp as a young man's. "Silas Thorne doesn't own the high ground. Not 1 acre of it, not legal. And I'm the only soul left alive who can prove it." Hannah went very still. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about 40 years ago," Tom said. "I'm talking about when this valley was first surveyed and the first grants filed, and I was a young man, and I watched it happen with my own 2 eyes." His hand tightened on hers. "The high ground, all of it, the whole watershed above this valley cliff, and spring. And all it was set aside for the Shoshone girl. By treaty. Federal treaty signed and sealed. This was theirs protected ground, and it was never to be sold nor settled. And when the government broke that treaty and pushed her people off that land, was supposed to revert to open federal land held in trust, not to be handed to any man who wanted it. And Thorne took it anyway," Hannah whispered. "His father first, then him." Tom nodded slowly. There was no one left to enforce it. The Shoshone were gone. The old land agent was dead. And the Thornes came along and started filing private claims on ground that was never legally theirs to claim, forging the paperwork, greasing the land office, building an empire on a broken treaty and a dead people's stolen home. He was shaking now with an anger 40 years old. Every acre of that high ground, every water right, Silas Thorne has built his whole scheme on, it's all standing on a forged foundation. And I'm the last man alive who was there when the first false claim got filed. I saw it done. I can name the year and the clerk and the lie." He sat back. "I never told. Who'd believe an old squatter over a rich banker? And telling meant admitting. I watched a wrong done and held my tongue 40 years, and a coward doesn't like to confess his cowardice." His voice cracked. "But I'm dying, and a dying man's got no more use for cowardice. And you just told me you're about to stand up in a courtroom and fight that man with the truth." He gripped her hand hard. "So I reckon it's time I stood up too. One last time. Before I can't stand it all." Hannah stared at the old man in the green glow, and her heart was pounding because she understood what she was being handed. "Tom," she said, "if you can prove Thorne's claims to the high ground are forged, then it's not just Maggie's note. It's not just Ethan. It's everything. Every acre he's stolen. The whole scheme. It all comes down." "It all comes down," Tom agreed. "They'll try to kill you before you can say it. Then they'll have to catch a dying man first, and I've been outrunning death all summer." Tom Pryor pulled his old feet out of the warm water and reached for his boots. "Help me up, girl, and help me down this mountain slow, because I aim to be alive on the day that Judge holds court, and I aim to walk into that courtroom on my own 2 feet, and I aim to look Silas Thorne in his lying face and tell the whole county what his family stole." He got one boot on, grunting. "I've been keeping this mountain secret 60 years. Turns out I was just keeping it for you. For this. For the day somebody worthy came along who'd know what to do with it." He looked up at her, fierce and old and unafraid. "Don't you waste it." Getting Tom Pryor down the mountain took the rest of that night, and it near killed them both. And by the time Hannah half carried him through his own crooked door, the sky was going gray. But he was alive, and he was fierce, and something in him had caught fire that no amount of dying could put out. The 11 days that followed were the longest of Hannah's life. She carried water at night, and she plotted by day, and she did neither one alone anymore, because the thing about a fire is that it spreads. Maggie came, and Maggie brought her receipts, every one stamped and dated and true. And she brought something else too, which was that she'd stopped being afraid. And when a widow with 3 children stops being afraid in front of her neighbors, the neighbors take notice. Cyrus Pruitt came up the Carter Road on the 4th day with his hat in his hands. "I turned you away," he said to Hannah, not able to look at her. "You saved my children, and I shut my door in your face out of fear, and I've been sick over it every day since." He lifted his head. "My wife told me last night, she said, Cyrus, that woman carried our young ones back from death, and you couldn't carry her a single piece of paper. And she was right, and I'm ashamed, and I've come to make it right." He held out a fistful of receipts. "Whatever you're building, count me in it. And I'll tell you something else. There's others feel the same. There's a dozen families in this valley been waiting for one person to go first, and they're watching you, Mrs. Carter. And if you stand up in that courtroom, you won't stand up alone. I'll see to it." He was as good as his word. By the day before the hearing, Hannah had receipts from 9 families, all of them showing the same crime. All of them showing Thorne's ledger, claiming more than folks had truly owed. 9 forged notes. A pattern no honest judge could call an accident. And she had Josiah Meade sober, 11 days running his hands steadier than they'd been in a decade, his written statement locked in her cellar and his testimony ready in his mouth. And she had old Tom Pryor still breathing, still fierce, rehearsing 40-year-old dates like a preacher rehearsing scripture. What she didn't have was the true ledger. And without it, Meade's word about the 2 sets of books was just one ruined drunk's word against a rich man's, and everybody in that courtroom would know it. It's in his house. Meade said the night before, sitting at Hannah's table with the lamp low. "In the safe in his study, I've told you. But nobody gets into Silas Thorne's house, and nobody in this county's fool enough to try. And if you're thinking what your face says, you're thinking, Mrs. Carter, put it out of your head. You break into that man's house, and Vance shoots you dead and calls it justice. And then where's your husband? And where's the widow? And where's this whole valley you're trying to save?" Hannah looked at the lamp a long time. "You're right," she said finally. "I'm not going to break in." She lifted her eyes, and there was something in them Meade hadn't seen before. Something cold and clear and just a little bit terrible. "I'm going to make him bring it to me." "Bring it how in God's name do you make Silas Thorne bring you the one thing that could hang him?" "By making him afraid I've already got it." Hannah leaned forward. "Mr. Meade, you kept those books 6 years. If I stand up in that courtroom tomorrow and I start naming figures, real figures, true figures, the kind of numbers only somebody who'd seen the true ledger could know. What does Silas Thorne do?" Meade went pale. "He panics. He thinks you've got the book. He thinks somebody sold it to you or stole it or—" He stopped. "He goes home to check the safe." "He goes home to check the safe," Hannah agreed softly. "Or he sends Vance. Either way, somebody has to open that safe and lay hands on that ledger to be sure it's still there. And a frightened man moving a thing he's trying to hide," she sat back, "is a man who can be watched, a man who can be followed, a man who might just carry the evidence out of the one place nobody could reach it and into the daylight where anybody could." She looked at Meade. "You said it yourself. He's not fool enough to leave it where a clerk could find it. But I'm counting on him being exactly fool enough to move it when he's scared, because that's the one thing men like Thorne can't help. When they think they're losing, they reach for the thing they love most. And Silas Thorne loves that ledger more than he's ever loved a living soul, because that ledger is every lie that built him." Josiah Meade looked at Hannah Carter across the lamplit table, and slowly, wonderingly, he began to smile. "Lady," he said, "Thorne was a fool to ruin me and leave you standing. He should have done it the other way round." He raised his cup of coffee like it was whiskey. "I kept his books 6 years, and I never once saw him outsmarted. I'd have paid money to live long enough to see it. Turns out I only had to stay sober." He drank. "Tell me what you need me to do." She told him. And they went over it until the lamp burned low and the dark thinned toward the day that would decide everything. And Hannah Carter lay down for 2 hours' sleep with her husband's side of the bed cold and empty beside her, and she did not weep because she was past weeping now. She was ready. They held court in the Cold Springs meeting hall because there wasn't a building in town big enough otherwise, and by the time Hannah walked through the doors, there wasn't a seat left in it. The whole valley had come. Every family Thorne had ruined, and every family he'd frightened packed shoulder to shoulder on the hard benches, and when Hannah came down the aisle, a murmur went through them like wind through wheat, and she felt every eye the way she'd always felt them, and this time she did not keep her chin level out of pride. She kept it level because she had come to win. Judge Harlan Krupp sat up front behind a long table, a heavy sweating man with small eyes that had already decided most of what they meant to decide. Silas Thorne sat to one side in his good gray coat, with a lawyer beside him, and Vance standing at his shoulder. And there, brought in from the cell in irons, sitting straight-backed on a bench with 2 deputies flanking him, was Ethan. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. He didn't smile. He just looked at her steady and calm, the way he'd looked at her from the road the morning they took him, and Hannah felt it go all the way down into her bones and hold her up. "Finish it," his look said. "I'm here, same as always." And there was one more face she needed, and she found it 3 benches back on the aisle. Old Tom Pryor alive, upright in a collar that hadn't been out of his trunk in 20 years, his ancient hands folded over the head of a cane. He'd made it. 3 days ago he could barely stand at the mouth of the mountain, and here he was having come down off that ridge and across the whole valley on nothing but spite and a promise, breathing hard, but breathing waiting. He caught Hannah's eye and gave her the smallest nod in the world, and it steadied her more than she could have said. 2 witnesses in this hall no amount of Thorne's money could buy back now, a ruined bookkeeper and a dying old man. The 2 people Silas Thorne had thrown away come to collect. Hannah nodded back, and she planted her feet. "We'll start with the criminal matter," Judge Harlan Krupp said, "since it's the gravest. Ethan Carter charged with the theft of 4 head of cattle from the Thorne Range. Banks produced a witness." He nodded to Thorne's lawyer. "Call him." The witness was a drifter named Del Rucker, and he swore on the Bible with a straight face that he'd seen Ethan Carter drive 4 steers off Thorne's North pasture by moonlight 3 weeks past. And he described it in detail, and the detail was good, because Thorne had paid for good detail. Then Hannah stood up. "Your Honor, may a wife ask the witness a question?" Krupp frowned. "This isn't—" "There's no lawyer for the defense, Your Honor, because we couldn't afford one on account of the banks bled us dry." Hannah's voice carried to the back of the hall. "So either a wife asks, or an innocent man goes to prison with no one to speak for him. Which does the law prefer?" The crowd murmured. Krupp's small eyes flicked over them, weighing, and he waved a fat hand. "Be quick." Hannah turned to Del Rucker. "You said it was moonlight. 3 weeks past. That'd be the night of the 14th. "If you say so, ma'am." "I don't say so. The calendar says so." Hannah lifted a folded paper. "This is the almanac Mr. Rucker printed in Cheyenne, sold at the Mercantile, and it says that on the night of the 14th, there was no moon at all. New moon, dark as the inside of a cow." She let that sit while the crowd stirred. "So I'll ask you plain in front of God and this whole valley. How'd you watch my husband drive 4 steers by moonlight on a night the good Lord didn't hang a moon?" Del Rucker's mouth opened and shut. "He's mistook the date," Thorne's lawyer said smoothly, rising. "An honest man can mistake a date." "An honest man can." Hannah didn't look away from Rucker. "Can a paid one?" "Mr. Rucker, how much did Silas Thorne give you to swear my husband's life away? Was it worth it? Look at him." She pointed at Ethan. "Look at the man you lied about. And then look at yourself and tell this valley you did it for anything but money." Del Rucker looked at Ethan. Then he looked at the packed hall full of hard-watching faces, faces of people who knew exactly what kind of man Ethan Carter was, and exactly what kind of man had bought this testimony. And Del Rucker was a drifter and a liar, but he was not in the end quite fool enough to hang for Silas Thorne. "I want off this stand," Rucker muttered. "Answer the question," Hannah said. "I never saw nothing." It came out of him all at once and the hall erupted. "I never saw nothing, all right. A man paid me to say it. I don't want no part of it. I take it back, all of it. I never saw that man do nothing." And he was off the stand and pushing through the crowd for the door before Krupp could bang his gavel, gone out into the daylight, leaving the charge against Ethan lying dead on the floor where he'd dropped it. Judge Krupp banged for order, red-faced. "The criminal charge is—" He glanced at Thorne and something passed between them, and Hannah saw it and hated it. "Held over. Pending further witnesses." "Held over." Hannah's voice cut the noise. "Your Honor, the witness just recanted under oath. There's no charge left to hold. Either my husband walks out of here a free man, or you tell this whole valley why you're keeping an innocent man in irons on the word of a liar who ran out that door." The hall went dead quiet, every eye on the judge. And Harlan Krupp, sweating, cornered by 400 watching neighbors, did the only thing he could do. "The prisoner's released on his own recognizance," he snapped, "pending review. Strike the irons." And the deputies unlocked Ethan's chains, and Ethan stood up, rubbing his wrists, and he crossed the hall through the parting crowd and came and stood beside his wife, and he took her hand, and Hannah's knees nearly buckled with the relief of it. "You came," he murmured. "I finished it," she whispered back. "Or I'm about to." "Stay close, Ethan. The hard part's still coming." The hard part came next. The foreclosure matters. Krupp shuffled his papers, eager to move on. "The bank holds delinquent notes on a number of Valley properties. First, the Alderdice place. Widow Alderdice, the bank's ledger shows you 3 months in arrears, $68. The bank asks the court to grant foreclosure and possession." Maggie stood up, small and straight in her good black dress. "I'm not 3 months in arrears. I'm 1 month, and I've got the receipts to prove every payment. The ledger's a lie." Hannah stepped forward. "Your Honor, and it's not the only one. Widow Alderdice isn't the only family in this valley. The bank's ledger claims owes more than they truly owe." She turned, and she raised her voice so it filled the hall. "I've got receipts. Not just Maggie's. 9 families. 9. Every one of them stamped and dated by the bank's own hand, and every one of them showing that Silas Thorne's ledger claims a bigger debt than the family ever owed. She began to walk them forward, laying them on the judge's table one after another, and with each one she named a name, and with each name a family stood up in the crowd. The Pruitts, the Hendersons, the Alderdice place, the Coyles, the Vance's your own cousin, Sheriff. Did you know he forged your cousin too? Vance's face went stiff. 9 forgeries, Your Honor. 1's a mistake, 9's a crime. 9's a man who's been stealing this whole valley, 1 changed number at a time. And every soul in this room has known it in their gut for 2 years and been too afraid to say it. She slapped the last receipt down. Well, I'm saying it. Silas Thorne is a forger and a thief, and I can prove it, and I've brought the man who can prove it best. She turned. I call Josiah Meade. The name went through the hall like a thunderclap, because half of them remembered Josiah Meade, and all of them had watched him fall, and here he came now, up the aisle, sober and shaved and steady in a clean shirt Hannah had pressed for him herself, and he climbed onto the stand and swore his oath in a voice that did not shake. Mr. Meade? Hannah stood before him. You kept the bank's books. How long? 6 years. Tell the court how Silas Thorne keeps his ledgers. Josiah Meade looked out over the hall, over all the faces that had crossed the street to avoid him for 10 years, and he sat up straight and he told them. 2 sets, he said. Always 2. There's the one he shows all clean and honest kept at the bank. And there's the true one, the real numbers, what folks actually paid, what he actually took, and that one he keeps in a safe in his own house, because it's the one that'd hang him. His voice rang clear. I know because I kept both 6 years, until he decided a witness was worth more dead drunk than alive and sober. He ruined me to bury what I know, but I'm not buried yet. And I'm telling this court under oath, every figure in that bank ledger is a lie, and the truth is written in a book in Silas Thorne's study, and if you want to know what this valley really owes you, go and you open that safe. He turned then to the crowd, to the neighbors who'd watched him fall and crossed the street to avoid him ever after, and his voice broke and held. I helped him do it. God forgive me. For 6 years I inked those false numbers with my own hand, while your notes came due, and your farm slipped away, and I told myself it wasn't my sin, because it wasn't my ledger. It was my sin. I'm not up here to save myself. There's no saving a man who did what I did. I'm up here because I'd rather die telling the truth than live one more day inside his lie. Believe the drunk or don't. But send a man to that safe and the book will tell you I'm right. The hall roared. For a moment, it was chaos. 400 people surging half to their feet, and above the noise a big voice bellowed, "Then open the safe!" And another took it up, "Open it! Open the safe!" And it swelled into a chant that shook the rafters, the whole ruined valley finding its voice at once after 2 years of swallowing it. Hannah pressed it. She had to press it now while the fire was hot. You hear them, Your Honor. She stepped up to the judge's table and put both hands flat on it and leaned in. That's not a mob. That's 9 families who've been robbed, and a courtroom full of witnesses to it, and every one of them asking for the one thing the law is supposed to give them, the truth. There's a book that settles this. Mr. Meade has told you where it sits. All you have to do is send a man to fetch it and open it in front of us all. And if I'm lying, it'll show. And if Thorne's lying, that'll show too. She straightened and turned to the crowd, letting them hear her. That's all we've ever wanted in this valley. Not charity, not miracles. Just the true numbers laid open in the light where a rich man can't change them in the dark. Order the safe opened, Your Honor. Order it and let the truth stand wherever it falls. The chant rose. Open it. Open it. And Harlan Krupp, sweating through his collar, looked out at the storm of his neighbors and reached trembling for his gavel. And for one shining half-second, Hannah Carter believed she had done it. Believed the judge was about to speak the words that would send a deputy to Thorne's study and end the whole rotten business forever. And through the roar, Hannah watched Silas Thorne. She watched his face, and she saw the exact moment the fear got into him. Not the courtroom, Not the crowd. He could weather those. But the ledger, the naming of the ledger, the 400 neighbors now shouting for his safe to be cracked open in the daylight. She saw Silas Thorne's eyes cut just once, quick and involuntary, toward the door and the street and the direction of his house. And she leaned close to Ethan and breathed, "There, he's afraid. We've got him, Ethan. We've got him." But she'd underestimated him. She'd forgotten the first rule the mountain ever taught her, which was that a cornered thing doesn't run. It fights. Silas Thorne rose to his feet. He rose slow, and he smoothed his gray coat, and he waited for the hall to quiet. And when it did, he was smiling, and the smile chilled Hannah worse than any shouting could have. "What a performance," Thorne said. "Truly, I'm almost sorry to end it." He turned not to the judge, but to the crowd playing them the way he played everything. "You've all enjoyed watching Mrs. Carter accuse me. So let me return the favor. Let me tell you what Mrs. Carter has been doing while she plays the saint." He drew a folded document from his coat slow and held it up. "This is a claim filed at the county land office 3 days ago and granted. A water rights claim on a natural spring of considerable value located on the high ground of this valley." His eyes found Hannah's and they glittered. "A spring that Mrs. Carter has known about for months. A spring she has been secretly drawing from night after night without a permit, without a filing, without a word to a living soul, concealing a resource of enormous value while her neighbors suffered and doling it out in secret to buy exactly the loyalty you've all just watched her collect." The hall went silent. Every face turned to Hannah. "That's right," Thorne said softly into that silence. "Ask her. Ask her where the Pruitt children's water came from. Ask her where the medicine came from. Ask her why 9 families suddenly stopped needing to sell. She's been sitting on a fortune in water this whole valley was dying for want of hiding it, hoarding it, using it to build herself a following, and now she stands here calling me a thief." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I've filed a lawful claim on that spring. It's the bank's now legal and recorded, which means every drop of water Hannah Carter has drawn from it these past months she has stolen. From me. I want her charged. And I want the sheriff to ride up to that high ground today and take possession of what is legally mine." "You can't," Hannah started. "I can. It's filed. It's stamped. It's real." Thorne smiled at her, and it was the smile of a man laying down a winning hand. "You wanted to fight me with paper, Mrs. Carter. I've simply brought better paper. I never hoarded a drop." Hannah wrenched her arm free of Vance and turned to the crowd, to the faces, because the faces were the only thing that mattered now, and she could feel them turning, feel the doubt Thorne had planted spreading through them like a crack through ice. "You heard him. He says I sat on it. He says I hoarded it. Cyrus Pruitt, stand up. Stand up and tell them. Did I hoard it? Or did I carry it to your door in the dark when your babies were dying?" Cyrus Pruitt was on his feet before she finished. "She saved my children. With that water gave it free. Asked nothing." "The Alderdice boy." Maggie was up too fierce, her voice cracking over the hall. "My Sam would be in the ground, but for what she brought me. Hoarding. She near killed herself carrying it 4 miles down a mountain in the black of night so my son could live. Ask any of us. Ask the whole valley." And they rose then, family after family, the Hendersons and the Coyles, and all of them standing up along the benches to say the same thing. She gave it to us, and for one moment the tide swung back, and Hannah felt it swing, felt the hall tilting toward her again. But Silas Thorne had spent 2 years learning exactly how to turn a frightened valley, and he was not finished. "Of course she gave it to you," Thorne said, cutting across them cold and reasonable. "That's the cleverest part. She gave you just enough to make you love her. Just enough to build the little army you see standing up for her right now. And what do you suppose she'll ask of you in return, once she's got a legal monopoly on the only water in 100 miles? He spread his hands. "I'm not the one who kept it secret. I'm not the one who slipped through the dark instead of filing an honest claim so the whole valley could share it fairly under law. Ask yourselves why a woman hides a thing, friends. Ask yourselves what she means to do with it once you've all made her your queen." He turned to the judge, dismissing them. The claim is lawful, Your Honor. The concealment is a crime. Do your duty. And the doubt came back into the faces. Not all of them, but enough. Because Thorne had said the one thing that a hard people in a hard year could not quite shake off, the fear that a good thing kept secret must have a price hidden inside it. And Hannah saw it land, saw some of the standing families falter and glance at one another, and she understood with a sick lurch that the truth was not always enough, that a lie wearing the coat of reason could stand up against it and sometimes win. Sheriff? Krupp's gavel came up. Take her. Your Honor, I have never asked this valley for one thing. The gavel came down. Hannah Carter, you're remanded on charges of theft and unlawful concealment. Sheriff Vance, secure the prisoner and secure the high ground for the bank. Vance's hand closed hard around Hannah's arm. Ethan came off the bench like a shot, and the two deputies caught him, and he fought them, roaring her name, and it took both of them, and a third to hold him. And the hall dissolved into a storm of shouting families surging into the aisle, deputies shoving them back. Krupp hammering his gavel to no effect at all. And above it all, Silas Thorne stood calm and untouched in his gray coat, watching the folded claim, still in his hand, having spilled the secret of the mountain out into the daylight, and turned it in the space of 5 minutes from Hannah's salvation into the rope around her own neck. She stood in the grip of the sheriff with the whole world coming apart around her. And she did the only thing she had left. She found Ethan's eyes across the churning hall, across the deputies wrestling him down, and she held them, and she did not look away, and into all that noise and ruin she mouthed 3 words at him, slow and clear and steady as the warm water in the belly of the mountain. Not yet beaten. Vance hauled her 2 steps toward the door, and Ethan was still fighting the deputies, and the whole hall was a wall of noise, and it was into that noise, thin and cracked, and somehow cutting through all of it, that a single old voice rose up from 3 benches back. Silas Thorne. It was not loud. It was old and worn and half a whisper. But there was something in it that stopped the room. The way a hand stops a swinging door, and the shouting died. And 400 people turned, and there was Tom Pryor on his feet, one hand white-knuckled on his cane, and the other pointing a trembling finger straight at the man in the gray coat. You can't own that high ground, Tom said, because it was never yours to claim, and I'm the last man alive who watched your daddy steal it. The silence that came down over the hall was a different kind than before. Krupp banged his gavel, uncertain now. Sit down, old man, this is 40 years I've kept my mouth shut, and I'll not keep it 1 minute longer. Tom Pryor came forward slow, one shaking step at a time, refusing the hands that reached to steady him, and the crowd parted before him like he was something holy. That whole watershed above this valley, the cliff, the spring, all of it was Shoshone land, treaty land, set aside by the government of these United States, signed and sealed, never to be sold nor settled by any white man living. He reached the front and turned to face the hall, breathing hard, but his voice held. I was here when the treaty was made. I was a young man, and that old woman's people fed me through a winter that would have killed me, and I watched the government promise them that ground forever, and I watched the government break the promise and drive them off, and I watched what happened to the land after. His finger swung back to Thorne. It was supposed to go back to the government, held in trust, federal ground. But there was nobody left to guard it, so your daddy walked into the land office in the winter of '43 and filed a private claim on ground he had no more right to than the moon, and he paid a clerk named Elias Dunn $40 to lose the treaty map and stamp the lie, and that Silas Thorne is the rotten foundation your whole fortune stands on, every acre, every water right, every note you ever wrote against this valley, all of it built on a forged claim to stolen federal treaty land. Thorne's smile had gone rigid. The man's senile, he said. He's a squatter and a drunk's older brother, and he's describing something he claims happened 40 years ago, with no proof but his own. The map's not lost. Tom Pryor said it quietly, and Thorne stopped dead. That's the thing about a paid man, Silas. Elias Dunn took your daddy's $40, but he was a Christian at the bottom of him, and it sat on his conscience, and he didn't burn that treaty map like he was told. He kept it. And on his deathbed 30 years ago, he gave it to the one man he trusted to know what to do with it. And that man was me, because I was the only one left who'd been there and knew what it meant." The old man's eyes blazed. "It's real. It's dated. It's got the federal seal and the treaty line drawn plain, and it shows that high ground belonging to the Shoshone by law, and it's been sewn into my mattress for 30 years, waiting for the day I'd have the nerve to use it." He swayed, caught himself on the cane. "Well, here's the nerve, and here's the day." The hall did not roar this time. It went dead silent, which was worse because a silent crowd is a crowd doing arithmetic, and every soul in it was adding up the same terrible sum. And Judge Harlan Krupp was adding fastest of all. Hannah saw it move across his sweating face, and she understood it before he did. Because if that high ground was federal treaty land, then Thorne's claim wasn't just fraud against the valley. It was fraud against the United States government. And any local judge who ruled on it, who blessed Thorne's stolen claim from the bench, who ordered a sheriff to seize treaty land for a private bank, that judge wasn't looking at a scandal. He was looking at a federal prison, Your Honor. Hannah wrenched her arm from Vance's slackened grip and stepped forward, and now she spoke not to the crowd, but straight to the small, frightened eyes of Harlan Krupp, quiet and reasonable and merciless. "You're a county judge, and what you've just heard is a matter of federal treaty land and fraud against the Federal Land Office. That's not yours to rule on. That never was. If you grant Silas Thorne's claim to that high ground today, and it comes out, and it will come out. Your Honor, there's 400 witnesses in this room and a treaty map sewn in a mattress. Then you didn't just make a mistake. You put your name on a federal land fraud. You hang next to him." She let it land. "Or, you do the one safe thing a smart man does when he finds himself standing on a trap door. You step off it. You set this over for the federal marshal, and you order that safe opened right now in the open. So the truth's a matter of record before anybody can change it. And you make sure the record shows that Harlan Krupp was the judge who called for the truth and not the one who buried it." Krupp stared at her. His gavel hand was trembling. "Open the safe," Hannah said softly. "It's the only door out of this room that doesn't have a rope on the other side of it. And you know it." There was a long moment. Then Harlan Krupp, who was a coward but not a fool, and who had just felt the floor go out from under his whole comfortable arrangement, made the only choice a coward had left. He brought the gavel down, and his voice cracked as he did it. "Sheriff Vance, you will proceed to the residence of Silas Thorne, and you will bring the safe or its contents to this hall. Now, under the eyes of 6 men of this valley, chosen by the crowd, so there's no question of tampering." He swallowed. "And Mr. Thorne is to remain in this room until the federal marshal can be sent for. Nobody leaves. Nobody." "You can't be serious." For the first time, Silas Thorne's voice had a crack in it. "Harlan, look at me. After everything I've—" "Don't." Krupp would not look at him. "Don't you say another word to me, Silas. Not one. You've been leading me toward a gallows for 2 years and smiling while you did it." He mopped his face. "Sheriff, go." And that was the moment the whole thing turned, because Boyd Vance, standing at Thorne's shoulder with a tin star he'd sold cheap, looked around that hall at 400 hard faces, at the widow he'd threatened, at the old man with the treaty map, at the judge, scrambling to save his own neck, and Boyd Vance did his own arithmetic. And it came out the same as the judge's. "There's no need to fetch the safe," Vance said. Thorne rounded on him. "Boyd, I said there's no need." Vance reached inside his own coat slow, and every man in the hall tensed, and what he brought out was not a gun. It was a book. A worn leather ledger, thick and cracked, and he held it up where the whole hall could see it. "Because I've had it since this morning. He gave it to me at dawn to hide after the Carter woman's storekeeper friend let slip she might know something. Told me to take it out of the house and sit on it till the trouble passed." Vance's jaw worked. "I've done a lot of low things for this man's money. Threatened a widow, run an innocent man into a cell, and I told myself every time it was just the job." He looked at Ethan, then at Hannah, and something like shame crossed his hard face. But I'll not hang for him, and I'll not carry his lies one more mile." He walked to the judge's table and set the true ledger down on it with a heavy final sound. "It's all in there. Everything Meade said. Every real number. Every forged note. Every dollar he skimmed. I've read it. God help me, I've read it." He unpinned the star from his chest and set it on the book. "I'm done." The hall erupted, but Hannah barely heard it because she was watching Silas Thorne. She watched the smile fall off him for the last time. She watched him look at the ledger on the table, the thing he loved more than any living soul, laid open now in the daylight where anyone could read it. And she watched him understand all at once and completely that it was over, that the woman he'd called a fat homesteader's wife, the woman he'd been so sure was too small and too laughable to matter, had planted her feet in front of his whole empire and brought it down without ever once raising her hand. "You," Thorne said. He was staring at Hannah, and his voice had nothing left in it but hate. "You did this, with a bucket of water and a pack of beggars." "No," Hannah said. And she was not smiling, and she was not gloating because she had never wanted his ruin, only the valley's life. "You did this, Mr. Thorne, the day you decided some people were too small to fight back. That's the only mistake you ever made, but it was the whole mistake, and you made it over and over on Josiah Meade, and on Tom Pryor, and on Maggie Alderdice, and on me. And today, all your leftovers walked into one room and stood up at once." She held his eyes. "The mountain feeds the humble and buries the greedy. An old woman said that to Tom Pryor 60 years ago, and I didn't understand it till right now. You should have learned it. You had 40 years. The federal marshal came 11 days later, and by then the county already knew how it would end, because the true ledger had been read aloud in the meeting hall, to a room that wept and shouted through every page of it. The marshal was a lean, unsmiling man from Cheyenne, who had no stake in Cold Springs, and no love for anyone in it, which was exactly what the valley needed. He read Meade's testimony. He read the 9 receipts. He unsewed the treaty map from Tom Pryor's mattress with his own hands, and held it to the light and went very still. Because a federal man knows a federal seal when he sees one, and he knew at a glance that he was holding 40 years of fraud against the United States. He took Silas Thorne away in irons to stand trial in a federal court, where the man's money bought exactly nothing, and Cold Springs never saw him again, and the smile in the gray coat passed out of the valley's life like a fever breaking. The charges against Ethan died the day Del Rucker ran out the door. The charges against Hannah died the moment the treaty map came to light, because a person cannot steal water from a claim that was never lawful, and Thorne's claim had never been anything but ink over theft. Maggie kept her farm. So did the Pruitts and the Hendersons and the Coyles, and every family whose true receipts made a liar of the forged ledger. The notes were corrected to what folks had honestly owed, and honestly owed was a thing most of them could manage now because the dying had stopped, and Hannah kept the promise she'd made in a filthy shack over a bottle of whiskey. She stood up in the meeting hall the night the corrected notes were finished in front of the same valley that had crossed the street to avoid Josiah Meade for 10 years, and she made them look at him. "Every one of you knows how Silas Thorne fell," she said. "You saw the receipts, and you heard the ledger read. But there's a name I want set straight before this valley, and I'll not sit down till it is. That ledger got read because one man had the courage to name it under oath when naming it could have gotten him killed. This valley called him a drunk and a thief for 10 years because a rich man told you to. Well, the rich man's in irons and the truth's in the open, so hear it plain. Josiah Meade didn't break Thorne by accident. He broke him on purpose, sober, standing up when every one of you was still too scared to. He's not the drunk. He's the man who saved your farms." She turned to him. "And I'll thank this valley to remember it." They did more than remember it. They made him keeper of the honest books, the compact's ledger, the corrected notes, the careful record of what the mountain gave and to whom, and gave him back the only thing Thorne had truly stolen from him, which was the chance to do good work with his own 2 hands in front of people who trusted him. Josiah Meade never took another drink. He'd found a thing stronger than the bottle which was being needed, and he did those books with a straight spine and a clear eye, until the day he died, an old and respected man, the last entry in his own hand, thanking a woman who'd walked into a dead man's shack and asked him to live. But it was the high ground that Hannah worried over in the quiet, after lying awake beside a husband who was home again at last. "It's federal now," she said into the dark. "Treaty ground, held in trust. And I keep waiting to be glad of it, Ethan. And instead, I lie here scared. Because federal ground means Washington ground, and Washington's a long way off. And someday, some man in a far city is going to look at a map and see a valuable spring sitting on government land. And he's going to lease it or sell it or drill it. And it'll be Silas Thorne all over again, only bigger. And none of us will be able to plant our feet against a whole government." She turned to him. "We saved the valley from one greedy man. How do we save the mountain from all the ones that haven't come yet?" Ethan was quiet a while. "Same way you saved everything else," he said. "You give it a family." "What do you mean?" "I mean the marshal told you himself. Treaty land can't be owned, but it can be watched, held in trust for the people it was promised to, and looked after by the folks that live nearest under rules with the government's blessing, so long as nobody's getting rich off it." He propped up on an elbow. "So we don't hide the mountain anymore, Hannah. Hiding it was never going to last, and hiding it was what let Thorne turn it into a weapon against you. We do the opposite. We bring the whole valley in. We make it everybody's, so it's nobody's to steal. A man can't buy a secret if there's no secret left to buy. A speculator can't sell a spring if 400 families are standing on it saying it belongs to all of us and none of us, and it's not for sale at any price." He touched her face. "You always said the mountain gives enough, not everything. Well, enough for the whole valley shared out fair and careful forever. That's a thing worth more to these people than gold, and they'll guard it better than any lock. You just have to trust them with it, the way Tom Pryor finally trusted you." Hannah lay in the dark and turned it over, and slowly the fear went out of her, because she saw that he was right, and that it was the last lesson the mountain had left to teach. So they brought the valley in. They did it careful the way Hannah did everything now. She called the families together in Maggie's barn, all of them who'd stood up in that courtroom, and she laid her journals out on a plank table, 3 years of watching the mountain breathe, written in a hand that had grown sure and strong, and she told them everything. The warm water, the green, the eggs kept in the cool mud, the medicine on the walls, and the rules above all, because the mountain gave enough and never everything, and a valley that forgot, that would kill the very thing that kept it alive. "There's rules and they're not mine," Hannah told them. "They're the mountains and Tom Pryor's and an old Shoshone woman's who kept this place alive before any of us drew breath, and we break them at our peril." And she read them out, and the families wrote them down and swore to them one by one. Never a goose nest disturbed, never more taken than the falls could give back. In a week she showed them the scratched line and made a keeper of it a rotating watch, so no one family could ever bleed the pools dry. Native seed replanted every spring for what was harvested. The place taught to every child born in the valley, so the knowing could never again rest in one pair of hands that greed or death could snuff out. And it was never ever to be a thing anyone got rich from, not sold, not leased, not hoarded, held in common and in trust, the way it was always meant to be held in honor of the people it was first promised to. They called it the Compact, for lack of a better word, and every family in the valley set their name to it, and the ones who couldn't write made their mark. And Tom Pryor signed, last his hand, shaking so bad Hannah had to steady it. And when he was done, he sat back and looked at all those names and wept without shame. 60 years, he said. 60 years I carried it alone and scared. And now look how light it is when everybody carries it. He gripped Hannah's hand. You did that, girl. You didn't just find the mountain. You gave it a whole valley to belong to. That old woman would have loved you. She'd have loved you fierce. Then the winter came, and the compact was tested, and it held. It was a hard winter, the hardest in years. Snow to the eaves and roads closed for weeks at a stretch, the kind of winter that in the year before would have emptied graves across the whole valley. But no family went thirsty, because the warm spring never froze and the keepers carried water on the worst days when nothing else moved. No family starved because there were eggs laid up in the cool mud a winter's worth, and more shared out fair. And when the fever came down the valley in February, the way it always came, it did not take a single child, because there was medicine growing green on a warm stone wall, and Hannah Carter had taught a dozen women how to steep it, and the sick rooms that had been places of dying were places of getting better now. Little Sam Alderdice pulled through his second winter fat and loud, and the night the roads finally opened in spring. Maggie brought him up the Carter Road to say thank you, though she'd said it 100 times, and the boy ran to Hannah and threw his arms around as much of her as he could reach, and he did not see a big woman or a small one. He saw the person who'd always been there when the fever came, and he held on, and Hannah held him back. And over his head she and Maggie didn't need to say a word. The valley that came through that winter was not the valley that had gone into it. The families that had spent 2 years watching each other like rivals over a shrinking well came out of the snow bound together by a secret they now all shared and all guarded, and there is no bond in this world quite like a thing kept in common and kept well. They had stood up together in a courtroom. They had signed their names together to a compact. They had carried water and medicine to one another's doors through a killing winter and asked nothing back because the mountain had taught them through one stubborn woman who wouldn't stop planting her feet that real wealth was never the size of one family's fortune, but the strength of the whole valley's hand when the snow came down. And at the center of it, quiet and steady, were the two people who'd crawled into a crack in the dark, following a flock of geese back when the whole thing began. Ethan Carter went back to being a rancher because that was what he loved, and he never once in his life told anyone he'd been the man who found the mountain. Because he hadn't found it, he'd followed his wife into it, and he was content to let that be the whole story. And Hannah, who had stood by a wall at 16 and smiled, while a whole room laughed, Hannah became without ever once seeking it the person the valley turned to. Not because she was the biggest voice or the loudest, because she was the one who'd carried the water in the dark when carrying it could have gotten her killed, and everybody knew it. And there is a kind of respect that can't be bought or forged or frightened into being, and it settled over Hannah Carter like a coat that had been waiting her whole life to fit. She sat on her porch that first spring evening after the roads opened with Ethan beside her, and the valley green and living below them, water running in the creek again where it belonged, and she thought about the woman she'd been a year ago digging in a dead creek bed, with her bare bleeding hands, sure the ground was dying, and everything with it. "You know what I keep thinking," she said. "Tell me that the water was up there the whole time." She watched the light go gold over the fields. "All those months I was on my knees in that dead creek sure we were finished. It was there, a mile up the ridge, warm and running, more than enough, just waiting on somebody brave enough or foolish enough to go into the dark after it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Makes you wonder how many valleys die of thirst with the water right there the whole time, just because everybody's too scared of the dark to go look." Ethan put his arm around her. "Not this one," he said. "No," Hannah said, and she smiled, and below them, the geese came in low over the greening fields, heading up toward the high ground, the way they always had, the way they always would. "Not this one." Tom Pryor did not see a second spring. He went in his sleep that first winter in his own bed with the corner of the treaty map still tucked under his pillow, the way a child keeps a favorite thing. Hannah found him when she came to bring his water, and she sat with him a long while before she told anyone, holding his cold old hand, and she was not sad the way she'd expected to be. She'd seen his face. He'd died the way a man dies when he's finally set a thing down that he carried too long easy and unburdened, and there was a peace on him she'd only ever seen on him once before, sitting with his feet in the warm water in the belly of the mountain. "You did it," she told him, though he couldn't hear. "You stood up, one last time, just like you swore. And you didn't waste it, Tom. Neither one of us did." The whole valley came to bury him. That was the thing that would have surprised the Tom Pryor of a year before, the lonely old squatter who sat on a nail keg and watched a road nobody stopped on. 400 people came. They stood in the snow with their hats off while the preacher spoke, And then, one after another, valley folk who'd once thought him a crazy old man got up and told what he'd really been: the last keeper of a promise, the man who broke Silas Thorne, the one who'd carried the truth alone for 40 years because there was no one worthy to share it with until there was. They buried him on the high ground near the cliff, in the only piece of that federal soil the marshal allowed, and Hannah planted native seed on the grave herself. And by summer, it grew green and would not stop growing warmed. She always believed by the same heart of the mountain Tom had loved his whole long life. And then the years began to pass the way years do, faster than seems decent. The valley prospered. Not the loud, sudden way a boomtown prospers, all silver strikes and saloons here today, and a ghost by winter. It prospered the slow, deep, unkillable way, the way ground prospers, when the people on it take only what they need and put back what they take. Travelers passing through Cold Springs remarked on it without ever understanding it. They'd stop at the mercantile and shake their heads at the healthy livestock and the full granaries and the children who didn't die of the fevers that emptied other valleys, and they'd ask what the secret was, and the folk of Cold Springs would smile and say, there wasn't one, it was just good land and good neighbors, and the travelers would ride on believing it, which was exactly how the valley wanted it. Because the mountain was never spoken of to outsiders. That was the first rule, and the deepest, and the valley kept it the way they kept the Sabbath. A speculator couldn't buy a secret nobody would sell him. A railroad man couldn't survey a spring he was never told existed. And so the warm water ran on year after year, feeding a valley that the wider world thought was simply lucky, and the world never knew how close it had come to being a poisoned, drained, and empty place with a rich man's mansion at the head of it. Hannah Carter grew older in the middle of all of it, and she grew, though she'd have laughed to hear it said, into something like the wise woman of the valley. It happened without her ever reaching for it. Folks brought her their troubles the way you bring a thing to someone who's proven she won't drop it. A young couple fighting over a fence line. A family behind on a debt to the new honest bank. A child sick with a fever no herb seemed to touch. And Hannah would listen and plant her feet and find the way through the same way she'd found the way through everything since the day she put her bleeding hands in a dead creek and refused to accept that the water was gone for good. Her journals grew into a whole shelf of them, and then a whole trunk, and the valley came to treat them as something close to scripture, not for the herbs and the water levels alone, though those were in there careful and exact, for the other thing that had crept into them over the years, the thing Hannah wrote almost without meaning to on the nights when the work was done and the lamp was low. How to hold a thing in common without it tearing a people apart. How to tell the difference between the fear that keeps a secret safe and the fear that keeps a person small. How enough is a stronger word than more, and always was and always will be. She was writing down without ever calling it that everything the mountain had taught her so that it could go on teaching after she was gone, and she taught the children herself. That was the part she loved best. Every child in the valley when they turned 12 was brought up the ridge for the first time in the gray hour before dawn, the same as it had always been done, and shown the crack and led through into the green glow and told the whole story. The drought, the geese, the banker in the gray coat, the old man with the treaty map. And Hannah told it to every new group herself as long as her legs would carry her up that ridge, because there was one part of it she would not trust to anyone else to say right. There's a thing folks get wrong about this story. She'd tell them sitting on the warm stone at the edge of the pool with a ring of 12-year-olds around her and the geese preening in the steam behind. They think it's about the mountain, the water, the eggs, the medicine. They think we were saved because we got lucky and found a treasure. She'd shake her head. We weren't. Half this valley knew there was something up the high ground Tom Pryor knew at 60 years. The geese knew it. It wasn't the finding that saved us. Any fool can find a thing. She'd lean in and her old eyes would go bright. It was what we did after, whether we grabbed it for ourselves or shared it out, whether we bled it dry in one greedy season or took only enough and let it live. That's the only thing that ever saves anybody, not what you find, but what kind of soul you are when you find it. And then she'd say the last part quiet, the part that was really for the child in the ring, who sat at the edge, too shy, or too big, or too poor, or too plain. The one the others didn't quite make room for because there was always one, and Hannah always found them. And I'll tell you who saves Valley's child. It's not the loud ones. It's not the rich ones, or the pretty ones, or the ones everybody makes room for. It's the ones the world overlooked. The ones who learned to plant their feet because nobody ever handed them a soft place to stand. You remember that. Whoever you are. Whatever they've made you feel. This whole valley is alive because a woman everybody laughed at refused to believe she was too small to matter. The children of Cold Springs grew up on that. And the day came, as Hannah had always feared and always known it would, when the wider world finally came for the mountain. It was near 20 years after the drought. Hannah's hair had gone white and her knees had gone stiff, and she needed a hand up the ridge now, and Ethan grayer than his years, but still quiet, and still hers was slower too. They were old, and it was into their old age that a man in a fine city suit stepped down off the noon stage in Cold Springs with a leather case full of papers and a letter from a mining company back east, and began very politely asking questions about a geothermal spring rumored to lie somewhere in the high country above the valley. Word reached the Carter porch within the hour. "So it's come?" Hannah said. She set down her sewing. Her hands didn't shake the way they once had. They were too old to bother. The thing Tom carried a map against for 40 years. The thing I lay awake dreading the first winter. It's finally walked into town in a good suit. She looked at Ethan. "And I'm too old to fight it, and so are you. And half the folk who signed the compact are in the ground beside Tom now." "Then it's a good thing," said a voice from the yard, "that you taught the rest of us." They looked up. Sam Alderdice stood at the gate, and he was not a sick 4-year-old anymore. He was a broad-shouldered man of 24, with his dead father's steady eyes and his mother Maggie's iron in his jaw. And he was the elected keeper of the compact, now chosen by the valley the year before. And behind him in the road stood 24 more young men and women Hannah had led up that ridge at 12, and told the whole story to grown now planted in the yard like a fence. A flood couldn't move. "We've got this one, Miss Hannah," Sam said. And he took off his hat to her, the way the whole valley did, the way they'd done since before he could remember why. "You carried it long enough. Sit on your porch. Let us show you we were listening." Hannah looked at that yard full of young people, and something rose up in her chest, so big it near stopped her breath, because she understood what she was seeing. She was seeing the mountain's deepest rule-made flesh. She had not hoarded what she knew. She had shared it out careful to every child in the valley, year on year, and now in her old age, when the strength had gone out of her own arms, it came back to her, multiplied standing in her yard, with its hat in its hand. "All right, Sam," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "Show me." What the mining man met in Cold Springs was not what his letter had led him to expect. He expected ignorant homesteaders he could dazzle with legal words and buy off with easy money. What he got was a young compact keeper named Sam Alderdice, who let him talk himself all the way out, polite as could be, and then laid 3 things on the table of the meeting hall in front of the whole assembled valley. First, a certified copy of a 40-year-old federal treaty establishing beyond argument that the high ground was protected. Shoshone Trust land never to be leased, sold, or developed by any private party. A copy the valley had made and filed and refiled in 3 separate federal offices over 20 careful years, so it could never again be lost by a bribed clerk. Second, a standing federal trust agreement secured with the help of the honest marshal all those years ago, naming the people of the valley as authorized stewards of the land in the government's name, bound to take nothing from it for profit. And third, the compact itself, 400 names deep and 20 years unbroken. The signed and sworn agreement of an entire valley that the mountain was not and never would be for sale. "You've come a long way, mister," Sam Alderdice told him, not unkindly. "And I'm sorry it was for nothing. But there's no spring for you to lease here. There's no owner for you to buy. There's a whole valley that holds this in common and holds it in trust, and you can't purchase a thing that 400 people have already given away to each other forever." He slid the papers back into their folder. "A wise woman taught me the trick of it when I was 12 years old, and I'll pass it to you for free since you came so far. You can't steal a thing that everybody owns. Greed needs a lock to pick. We don't have one." The mining man looked around the packed hall at the hard, calm, immovable faces of people who had rehearsed this exact moment their whole lives without ever knowing when it would come. And he understood that he had walked into the one valley in the West that could not be bought, bullied, or fooled. He gathered his case. He left on the next stage. And Cold Springs never saw his kind succeed within its borders. Not that year. Not ever, because a people who have learned to guard a good thing together do not unlearn it. Hannah heard the whole of it from her porch, told by a breathless Sam, who ran the news up the road the moment it was done, and when he finished, she reached up and took his face in her two old hands, the way she'd once cradled 3 goose eggs in her apron. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said. "And your mother's proud enough for the both of them, I expect, wherever Maggie's watching from." Her voice thickened. "You saved it, Sam. Not me. Not Tom. You. The little boy who was hungry. You grew up, and you saved the mountain, and someday you'll teach some hungry 12-year-old to do the same, and that's how it goes on. That's how a thing lives forever, not by one great soul carrying it, by each one teaching the next." But there was one piece of the story that took even longer to come right, and it was the piece Hannah cared about most, and it did not come right until she was very old indeed. It was the promise buried in the treaty, the fact that the high ground had never truly been the valleys at all, but had been promised long before any of them to the people who'd kept it first. Hannah had carried that quietly for years, unsure how to honor it. And in the end, it was honored the only way such things can be, imperfectly, and late, and with a full heart. Through the federal trust, through letters and patience, and the honest marshal's old connections, the valley found the descendants of the people who had once been driven off that land, found them scattered and diminished, but not gone, never gone, and did not merely acknowledge them. They welcomed them, named them co-stewards of the mountain, under the trust, by right and not by charity, so that the warm heart of the high country was tended at last in part by the great-grandchildren of the old woman who had saved a frightened boy named Tom Pryor through a killing winter 60 years before. Hannah lived to see the first of them stand at the mouth of the crack. An old woman, near as old as Hannah herself, who put her hand into the warm wind rising out of the dark, and closed her eyes, and said something soft, in a language Hannah didn't know, and then opened her eyes and said in English, "My grandmother told me of this place. I never thought to stand in it. I thought it was only a story." "So did I once," Hannah said. "An old man told it to me at his fence, and I thought it was just old man talk." She held out her hand. "Come. There's warm water and green things growing, and a whole valley that's been keeping it safe for you whether we knew your name or not. It was always yours. We only minded it till you came." And the two old women went down into the green glow together, and it was, Hannah would say afterward, the finest day of her long life. Maggie Alderdice did not live to see that day, and Hannah grieved her hardest of all. They had grown old side by side, the big woman and the small one, the two friends who'd held each other up in a dawn-lit yard the morning Ethan was taken. Maggie went in her sleep one autumn, a grandmother many times over her farm, still hers, her children grown and thriving on the land Thorne had tried to forge her off of. And at her burying, Hannah stood up the way Maggie had once stood up for her in a crowded courtroom and told the valley the truth of her. "You all know Maggie Alderdice as a fine old woman," Hannah said. "I knew her as the first soul in this valley who wasn't afraid. When everybody else was selling and running and keeping their heads down, a widow with 3 children and a rifle stood at her gate and refused. She had more to lose than any of us, and she risked all of it first, so the rest of us would have the nerve to follow." Hannah's voice broke. "There'd be no valley without her. There'd be no me. She once told me I was the only one who wouldn't run. She had it backwards. It was her. It was always her. And she never once knew it, which is exactly what made her worth following." They buried Maggie on the high ground too, near where they'd one day bury Hannah, and the geese flew over her the same as they flew over everyone the valley loved. Ethan went first in the end, the way he'd have wanted it, quiet and without fuss, an old rancher asleep in his chair with the evening light on him. Hannah sat with him the whole night before she'd let them take him, holding the rough, steady hand that had wiped the dirt off her bleeding knuckles in a dead creek a lifetime ago. And she did not fall apart because he'd told her once long before that if she fell apart, he'd be there when she was done. And now he wouldn't be. So she chose instead to hold together for him one last time. "You crossed 100 floors for me," she whispered to him. "Every single day of my life, you crossed the floor. And I never once forgot the first one." They buried him on the high ground near Tom Pryor, near the mountain he'd followed his wife into on faith, and never regretted a day of it. Hannah lived on a few years more, and she spent them the way she'd spent all the years since the drought, giving away everything she'd learned as fast as she could before the light went out of her and took it with her. She could not climb the ridge at all by then. So she had the 12-year-olds brought to her porch instead, and she told them the story from her rocking chair, her voice gone thin, but her eyes still bright, and not one child who heard it from her own lips ever forgot it. And when she knew her own winter was coming, she called Sam Alderdice up to the house, and she gave him the trunk. All of them. Every journal. 25 years of watching the mountain breathe of herbs and water levels, and the slow, hard wisdom of holding a thing in common. She put the trunk in his hands the way Tom Pryor had put a treaty map into hers, and she said the same words Tom had said because she'd understood at last that they were the truest words she knew. "I've been keeping this for you," she told him. "Turns out, that's all any of us ever do. We keep it a little while careful as we can, and then we hand it to somebody worthy, and we go on into the dark ourselves easy because we know it's in good hands." She closed his fingers over the lid. "Don't you waste it, Sam." "I won't, Miss Hannah." His eyes were wet. "You know I won't." "I do know it," she said. "That's the only reason I can go." Hannah Carter died in the spring in her own bed in a valley that had been given back its life, and the whole of that valley came to bury her on the high ground beside the two men who had loved her. Ethan, who followed her into the dark, and Tom, who trusted her with the light. And as they lowered her, a boy of 12, who'd heard the story from her own lips just the month before, looked up and pointed, and every head turned, and there they were, the geese. A long white line of them, coming in low over the mourners and rising up toward the warm heart of the mountain, the way they had every year for 100 years and would for 100 more. Nobody who stood in that valley ever forgot her. Long after the last person who'd known her face was gone, the children of Cold Springs still climbed the ridge at 12 to hear the story. Still learned to plant their feet, still guarded the mountain in common and shared its warmth in trust, and still knew, every one of them, that the whole of their bright and living valley had begun with two ordinary people who chose curiosity over fear and stewardship over greed. Because that was the true breakthrough, and it was never the cave. The geese only showed the way. The mountain only offered the gift. But it was a woman the world called worthless, and the quiet man who crossed a floor for her, who taught an entire valley. The one thing that saves every valley there ever was, that real wealth is not what you can seize and keep, but what you are brave enough to share, and that no soul on this earth is ever too small, too plain, or too overlooked to change the fate of a whole people, if only they refused to believe the world that told them so. Hannah Carter believed it, and a valley lived because she did.